روشنی نہیں ہے. اس خوبصورت اور بڑی سڑکوں پر بڑے بڑے مرسیڈیز گاڑیاں نظر آتی ہے، لیکن غریب کا موٹر سائیکل اور غریب کا سائیکل بھی پنکچر ہوا ہے. میرے پیارے بھائیوں، میں جانتا ہوں، میں خود ایک مزدور ہوں، میں خود ایک مزدور کا بیٹا ہوں. میں نے خود اپنے طور پر کالج یونیورسٹی کے زمانے میں مزدوری کی ہے، اور ہاتھوں کی مشقت کی وجہ سے، اس کی برکت کی وجہ سے ہاسٹل کے اخراجات میں خود اٹھاتا تھا. میں جانتا ہوں کہ غریب کا دن کیسے گزرتا ہے اور ان کی راتیں، مزدور کا مہینہ کیسے گزرتا ہے اور ان کے بچے. میں صبح آ رہا تھا، ایک مزدور نے مجھے فون کیا کہ سر میں رسولی ہے اور ہاسپٹل میں ایڈمٹ ہوا ہوں اور 2 گھنٹے بعد آپریشن ہونے کو ہے. اب کچھ پائپ کی ضرورت ہے، کچھ میڈیسن باہر لانے کی ضرورت ہے. تو میں تو مشکل سے کرایہ کسی سے قرض لے کر یہاں پر پہنچاؤں. اب دوائی کا کیا کروں، ڈاکٹر کے فیس کا کیا کروں، پائپ کا کیا کروں. اور میں سوچ میں پڑ گیا کہ یہ ایک مزدور کا مسئلہ نہیں ہے. پاکستان میں اس وقت 7 کروڑ سے زیادہ مزدوروں کا یہی المیہ ہے کہ ریاست اور پاکستان کا نظام، یہ حکومتیں ان سے کام تو لیتی ہیں لیکن ان کے بچوں کا خیال نہیں رکھتی، ان کے گھروں کا خیال نہیں رکھتی. میں جانتا ہوں جگہ جگہ انہوں نے لیبر کالونیاں بنائی ہیں. اب ان کو میں لیبر کالونیاں کہوں یا مچھر کالونیاں کہوں، جہاں بدبو، جہاں گندگی کا ڈھیر، جہاں سانس لینا مشکل، جہاں بچوں کے لیے کوئی پلے گراؤنڈ نہیں، جہاں لوڈ شیڈنگ، اور یوں لگتا ہے کہ جس طرح انسان نہیں، کوئی پولٹری فارم، مرغیاں رہتی ہیں، جانور رہتی ہیں. میرے پیارے بھائیوں اور دوستوں، سچی بات یہ ہے کہ پاکستان میں اس وقت کوئی ایسا ادارہ نہیں ہے جو مزدور کے حوالے سے کوئی اچھا پلاننگ کر لے، آپ کے مستقبل کے حوالے سے سوچے، آپ کے بچوں کے حوالے سے سوچے، آپ کے رہائشی مکانات کے حوالے سے سوچے. ہمارے قومی اسمبلی میں آپ کو 100% جاگیردار نظر آئیں گے، ہمارے سینٹ میں 100% جاگیردار نظر آئیں گے، ہمارے کیبنٹ میں 100% آپ کو جاگیردار اور سرمایہ دار نظر آ رہے ہیں. اس لیے یہ فطرت کی بات ہے کہ ایک ظالم جاگیردار اپنے جاگیر کے بارے میں سوچتا ہے، ایک سرمایہ دار اپنے کارخانے کے بارے میں سوچتا ہے. ایک لینڈ مافیا، ڈرگ مافیا، آٹا مافیا، پیٹرول مافیا، ڈیزل مافیا یہی سوچتا ہے کہ اپنے کارخانوں میں اضافہ کرے، اپنی شوگر ملز میں اضافہ کرے، اپنے کارخانوں میں اور اضافہ کرے. غریب کے بیٹے کے بارے میں، غریب کی بیوی کے بارے میں، غریب کے مستقبل کے بارے میں پاکستان میں ہر ادارہ خاموش ہے. تو کیا آپ لوگ پاکستانی نہیں ہیں؟ کیا آپ لوگ ٹیکس نہیں دیتے؟
you were saying before Ms. Boebert cut you off that it was early and that, you know, Mr. Biden hadn't been linked at this point. I think that's true. He hasn't been linked to any of these allegations that have been raised. I did want to talk about a couple of them specifically. With respect to the prosecutor issue, the removal of Prosecutor General Shokin, a couple of points I want to make on that front. Key one, I think, is that the removal of Shokin was actually detrimental to Hunter Biden and Burisma, because it was pretty clear, based on statements and testimony that's been given here in the House before these committees and in other instances, that he was not doing a great job, to say the least. He was sitting on the investigation. He wasn't moving it forward. I think there have been statements that have been made with respect to the IMF pressuring to have him removed by threatening to withhold $40 billion in international assistance unless he was removed. President Biden's request to have him removed along those lines was actually consistent not only with what he pushed for, or the IMF pushed for, but what others were pushing for as well, including Senator Johnson, I believe, on that front. So what we've got here is an effort to argue by our Republican colleagues that the removal of this prosecutor, President Biden asking or pressing to have him removed, was in some way an effort to undermine an investigation for Burisma. But it's pretty clear, I think, based on, again, the testimony that we've received and that's been presented in Congress before and published in some of our documents, that that's the exact opposite. Things were moving forward, not moving forward with him there. They were more likely to move forward without him. And so there's really no linkage there between the president and derailing any kind of investigation. With respect to the Devon Archer statements, Devon Archer said he's confirmed that over his decade-long business relationship with Hunter Biden, he never heard Hunter Biden discuss business with his father, either on phone calls or in person. And I did want to add this as well. Mr. Biden's bookkeeper, Eric Schwerin, from 2009 to 2018, he was his bookkeeper, had access to his bank account, said that he had no knowledge of President Biden having any involvement in Hunter Biden's financial activities. With respect to the Weiss issue, and I know that's been an issue that's been pushed a lot too, that argument is that Weiss was derailing the investigation into Hunter Biden and slowing it down. The key points on that obviously are the fact that Weiss was appointed by President Trump, and as Congressman Buck said a few days ago over in the Judiciary Committee hearings, if the president had removed Weiss when he first came into office, Republicans would have argued that that was an effort to derail the investigation against Hunter Biden. In fact, when the Attorney General testified, he noted that he had Senate Republicans who explicitly wanted him and sort of pressed for in their personal meetings that he promised not to remove Weiss or replace him. And we've had other testimony with respect to the FBI supervisors, the special agent who was in the SAC for the investigation, working with Mr. Weiss. Question, have you ever known U.S. Attorney Weiss to make prosecutorial decisions based upon political influence? Answer, no. Have you ever known any of the AUSAs in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Office of Delaware to let their prosecutorial decisions be guided by political interference? Answer, no. So I apologize for running over, but
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes
another unanimous
from South Carolina.
Request, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to enter into the record a bipartisan letter signed by Senators Portman, Johnson, and Kirk urging Ukraine to remove Mr. Shokin because of his own corruption.
Without objection, so ordered. Mr. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor, you know, in a trial, There's an exchange of evidence back and forth. What we see here today, we've presented evidence. I mean, the other side is a lot of bluster and theatrics. And also in a trial, you have affirmative defenses. I think the only affirmative defenses that are coming from the other side is, one, Donald Trump, like the ultimate affirmative defense that you could just say his name and all wrongdoing is gone away. I mean, Lisa McClain talked about this earlier, that he is living in their head. I would also submit to you that he's tap dancing in their head because that's all that they talk about. The second affirmative defense, according to the Democrats, is this magical shutdown clock that they have. But would it surprise you that every single appropriations bill that has tried to come before the floor, they have voted? They don't want to debate on government funding. They want to shut down the government. This is the kind of stuff that they're doing. And of course, the third affirmative defense, as you well know at this point, is attack the witness. Right? You don't have the facts, you don't have the law, you have theatrics, and you just go after the witness. It's like we live in amnesia, like they have this constant amnesia. We have statements from the ranking member about you don't need a vote on the floor, but that's what they talk about. You know, for the past 9 months, we've worked tirelessly to analyze all the evidence. Every single week, there's more evidence that drops. And this is despite the FBI. This is despite the DOJ. We have witness interviews, accounts of confidential human sources, whistleblower testimony. They haven't disputed that at all. Bank records, suspicious activity reports, text messages, WhatsApp messages. It's endless. And despite what my friends on the other side of the aisle may say, House Republicans have always held that this investigation should follow proper procedure and be done the right way, which is why we're here today. We know that Biden family members were complicit in and benefited from Hunter Biden's foreign business dealings. And as the lens begins to focus and as the evidence begins to mount, we uncover more and more about Joe Biden's involvement. Today I want to focus on the FD 1023, a document that shows a conversation between a confidential human source and a Ukrainian business executive, Mykola Zlochevsky. Let's dive into a few key points. The source asked Zlochevsky about the Ukrainian prosecutor's investigation into Burisma. He replied, "Don't worry, Hunter will take care of all these issues through his dad." 2, although Hunter Biden was labeled as stupid, that the guy's dog was smarter than Hunter, the source was told in 2016 that Hunter Biden was brought onto Burisma's board to protect them. 3, big fact, Hunter and Joe Biden both told Zlochevsky that he should keep Hunter Biden on the board. And of course, he received $1 million a year. Point 4, after the election, Zlochevsky said it cost $5 million to pay one Biden and $5 million to another, meaning Joe Biden. And point 5, in 2019, Zlochevsky said he didn't send any funds directly to the big guy. Wonder what that means. We talked about that a lot today. Because according to Zlochevsky, it would take investigators 10 years to find the records of payments to Joe Biden. If these allegations are true, and there's a reason why it was so hard to put together. This was done deliberately and on purpose. So we're here months later, we finally get this document released to the public. Mr. Turley, what in your eyes is the most serious allegation outlined in the FD 1023?
तो उनके लिए टाइम मांगा जा रहा है और इसमें कोई इल्जाम नहीं है कि कोई इलेक्शन डिले करना बताइएगा नवाज शरीफ साहब भी आगे हैं और पॉलिटिकल तौर पर वो इलेक्शन की तैयारियों में पंजाब में पाकिस्तान पीपल्स पार्टी जो है वो कितनी मजबूत रहेगी और इलेक्शन में कितना टफ टाइम जो है मुस्लिम लीग देगी आपको देखें मुस्लिम लीग नून हमारे खिलाफ इलेक्शन लड़ेंगे और हम उनके खिलाफ इलेक्शन लड़ेंगे हम भी कैंडिडेट खड़ा करेंगे वो भी जाहिर सी बात है मुस्लिम लीग नून का वो एरिया है वहाँ से वो जीतते रहे हैं वहाँ उनकी हुकूमत रही है और वो पूरी कोशिश करेंगे
अब जो आज प्राइम मिनिस्टर की हिदायत पे हम गए तो वहाँ पे जितने भी ख्वातीन और बच्चों से हम लोगों से मिले उनमें से अक्सर का जो गिला था मैं वो भी बता देता हूँ उनका ख्याल ये था कि जी हम पुरम तौर पे आ रहे थे और हमारे साथ हमारा कोई इरादा नहीं था किसी किस्म की भी ऐसी सूरत हाल पैदा करने का और ऐसा होना नहीं चाहिए था लेकिन लाजमी बात है जिस तरह मैंने आपको बताया कि हमारा खुद अपना पूरी कन्विक्शन ये है कि जो मुजाहिरीन बलूचिस्तान से आए हुए थे उनमें से किसी ने भी ये ऐसा कोई अमल नहीं किया लेकिन उन लोगों ने किया जो यहाँ पे
To what extent can you track that money with regard to the Bidens themselves? And that, I suppose, will come out through an inquiry. But until you have those interstitial relationships, you don't quite know what you have.
Professor, how can we use this document and maybe other documents that we have to expand the case, and how pivotal do you think that this document is to the case?
Well, I think that in an inquiry, when someone who is trusted by the FBI suggests that there was actual bribery involving the president, you need to contact everyone involved, including the source for the 1023, but also this is secondhand information, so you're going to have to pursue the references made by that source, and you do it in good faith and to see if there's a there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Without a yield back.
Chair now
Mr.
recognizes
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion for unanimous consent.
For what?
Mr. Chairman, I ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record a Washington Post article titled "The Republican Case Against Biden Takes a Body Blow" from Fox News because they failed to show any connection and their evidence is too far down the path to admit that they are wrong.
Without objection. Chair recognizes Mr. Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to start out by commenting, while this is not directly affecting this impeachment inquiry, I am so excited to have heard so many times from that side of the room how concerned folks are over keeping the government running, because you're all going to get a chance in just a few hours to put your money where your mouth is and vote on some bills that's going to keep the government funded. And I hope it's as important to you when you go to cast those votes as what you said that it is this afternoon. We've heard today that how many times Joe Biden has lied. He's lied about his role in his family's business dealings. We've also heard how in the White House he's struggled to keep up with new evidence about consistently shifted its messaging on President Biden's involvement in Hunter Biden's foreign business affairs. This summer, White House spokesperson Ian Sams shifted the White House's messaging to now claim that President Biden was never in business with his son. This is dramatically different than what we heard from the White House in their previous claims, where we were told that President Biden had no knowledge of Hunter Biden's business dealings. And yet again, the committee has revealed evidence that then Vice President Biden had direct knowledge of and involvement in Hunter Biden's foreign business dealings. Kenneth Rakishev is a Kazakhstani oligarch who was a director at Kazakhstan's state-owned oil company. Importantly, Rakishev maintains ties to Karim Mazamov, who became Prime Minister of Kazakhstan on April 2nd, 2014. On April 22nd, 2014, Rakishev wired $142,300 to an account associated with Hunter Biden, Rosemount Seneca Bohai. The next day, that same amount was sent to a car dealership in New Jersey for an expensive sports car for Hunter Biden. Around the same time as the payment for Hunter Biden's sports car, then Vice President Biden attended a dinner with Kenneth Rakishev, Karim Mazamov, Yelena Baturina, Hunter Biden, and Devin Archer at Cafe Milano in Washington, D.C. I believe that we have a photo of those here. There they are. And here, on another screen, we see a photograph with Mr. Mazamov on the right, standing with Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, along with Mr. Rakishev on the left. I don't know if that picture came up or not. Additionally, in April 2015, then Vice President Biden attended another dinner in Washington, D.C. with Prime Minister Mazamov, Hunter Biden, and Devin Archer. Clearly, Hunter Biden was selling the Biden brand and all the access and political favors that came along with it. This transcript I believe we're going to see it come up on the screen, is taken from the committee's interview of Devon Archer earlier this summer. In this excerpt, Archer reveals that then Vice President Biden hosted Hunter Biden, Archer, and Mark Holtzman, who was then the chairman of Kazakhstan's largest bank, for breakfast at the Naval Observatory, where Holtzman discussed who was going to be the next UN Secretary General with Vice President Biden. Mr. Holtzman was lobbying for Karim Masimov to receive the position. That meeting occurred on July 7th, 2015, shortly after Vice President had dined again with Masimov at Cafe Milano in Washington, D.C. Was Masimov trying to cash in? After all, a meeting with Vice President of the United States when trying to become UN Secretary just might be worth it for a sports car. And around that same time, Hunter Biden and Devon Archer were pursuing energy projects in Kazakhstan on behalf of the corrupted Ukrainian energy company Burisma, which was trying to expand its business into the country. This is another clear example of Hunter Biden peddling access to his father and Joe Biden participating in the influence peddling scheme. Hunter seeks business opportunities in a foreign country and provides access to and political favors through his father's office to get paid. Mr. Chair, I see I'm out of time, so I'll yield.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair,
Mr. Chair, I have a unanimous consent request.
Councilor
I
President.
seek unanimous consent to enter into the record a memorandum issued by staff of the Committee on Judiciary and Oversight explaining how the testimony of 5 senior IRS and FBI agents has been deep.
Without objection, Chair recognizes Mr. Langworthy from New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For years, we have heard shifting denials and deflections from President Biden relating to his son's foreign business deals and ventures. In fact, we know that President Biden has lied to the American people at least 16 times about his family's business schemes. In August 2019, Joe Biden told reporters, quote, "First of all, I have never discussed with my son or my brother or anyone else anything having to do with their business, period." End quote. Joe Biden continued to double down on this statement throughout the 2020 presidential race. In September 2019, Joe Biden again stated, "I've never spoken to my son about his overseas business dealings." These lies continued throughout the 2020 presidential race. It was only recently that the Biden administration has grudgingly begun to shift their answer on what Joe Biden knew about his son's foreign business deals. In June of this year, the White House changed its position by claiming that the president was not in business with his son. Moreover, media and members across the aisle continue to run cover for President Biden, repeatedly shifting the goalpost and repeatedly peddling the notion that Hunter Biden was selling the, quote, illusion of access. Evidence discovered by this committee in its investigation into the Biden brand, however, has revealed Hunter's product went well beyond illusions of access. On display is an example of actual access to the then vice president. During his transcribed interview, Devon Archer was questioned about how many times Hunter Biden had put his father on speakerphone while in business meetings. Now, Archer made it clear during this whole 10-year partnership that Joe Biden was on speakerphone maybe 20 times while Archer was present. And when later interviewed by Tucker Carlson, Archer went on to say, if you're sitting with a foreign business person and then you hear the voice of the vice president, that's prize enough. That's pretty impactful stuff. Archer later stated, in the rear view, it's an abuse of soft power. Now, President Biden's involvement in Hunter's business deals was not overt. Joe Biden did not email Hunter asking for Burisma's quarterly reports. All it takes for Biden to be involved in Hunter's business dealings is Biden crafting and implementing policy based on promptings from his son and receiving payment in return. Mr. Turley, have you ever had your parents call in during an official business meeting?
No.
Okay. Members across the aisle have characterized Hunter's speakerphone calls during business meetings as, quote, casual conversation and niceties about the weather and what's going on. Now, during a business meeting, have you ever answered a call from a parent or put them on speaker and then proceeded to discuss the weather?
Not in my case, no.
Okay. Would you say that such actions are generally out of the ordinary in the business world?
I couldn't speak for the whole business world, but it strikes me as being odd.
Yeah. Looking at the evidence like this transcript of Devin Archer's testimony and other evidence discussed in today's hearings, can you contrast the level of thoroughness of this committee's investigation compared with the Democrats' impeachment inquiry in 2019?
Well, I was highly critical of the, obviously, the Trump impeachment in the first Trump impeachment, which I felt did not develop a sufficient record to support the articles. I actually said that the investigation had merit to go forward, but that they hadn't established the basis for the articles. In the second impeachment, they used what I call the snap impeachment. They jettisoned any hearing at all, which I think did do damage to the impeachment process.
Now, looking at this transcript of Devin Archer's sworn testimony, would you agree that there are inconsistencies with President Biden's statements that he never discussed business with his son, or even later that he was not in business with his son?
Well, I think my understanding is that Devin Archer himself was asked that question and said that it was patently false to suggest that President Biden was not aware of his son's business dealings.
Very good. And Mr. Chairman, I would yield back any time to you.
Mr. Chairman, over here. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this article by the New York Post dated September 14th, 2023. House GOP probing then Vice President Biden's dodgy breakfast meeting with Kazakh bank official at official residence, showing Vice President Joe Biden taking meetings at the Vice President's residence with his son's business partners.
Ms. O'Connor, I assume you've had time to review and hopefully the bank memorandums and the evidence of that we derive from the suspicious activity reports about the various bank reports that allege money laundering, allege receiving wires from state-owned entities and things like that. How does that, what kind of crimes are we talking about there, and how often do you run across people, even the most criminal people, who have 170 suspicious activity reports?
Well, there was more than... That's right. What is it? 700 pages worth of documents that you released yesterday. I haven't looked at them all carefully. But one factor that continues to be overlooked is the fact that in tax law there is a concept of constructive receipt. If I owe you $100, but I don't want to pay you directly, I don't want any sort of trace, but I know that Representative Jordan pays your bills, I will pay him knowing that he's going to take care of you. But you have constructive receipt of that money from me. And I think that if the special agents were able to follow the leads that they wanted to develop, they would develop a lot of information that you'd be interested in.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, I have another unanimous consent request.
Go ahead.
Just to clarify, because Mr. Langworthy said that it was the Democrats who said that Joe Biden and Hunter Biden talked about the weather.
Point of order. Is that a point of order?
I would just like to
reintroduce
the Devin Archer testimony where he says they talked about the
Chair,
weather 6 times.
Point of order.
Recognize Mr. Biggs.
Yes, my point of order is that is not.
That is not a point of order. You are correct.
Well,
you are correct. The gentleman from Arizona is correct. Chair will now.
Unanimous consent request.
Who's that now? Do you have a unanimous consent?
Yes, to reintroduce those 6 pages of testimony from Devin Archer where
okay,
he talked about the weather.
For the 7th time without objection. Chair now recognizes Mr. Burleson.
You could have just called him and we would have been able to question him.
Thank you. As you know, he's headed to prison.
Chair recognizes Mr. Burleson. Who was that Mr. Biggs? Okay. Do you have a point of order? All right. Chair now recognizes Mr. Burleson from Missouri.
Thank you, Professor Turley. Could you tell me, would it be illegal or certainly unethical for elected officials to utilize the resources in their office, utilize their staff to financially benefit their family member's business or their own?
They would. Part of the problem with the reason I think the illusion defense is sort of illusory is that if the president was involved in that influence peddling scheme, it would still involve using his office as a commodity for corruption, right?
Yes.
Even if you didn't follow forward. And I think that that itself would become an issue of public corruption we'd have to discuss.
Thank you. In fact, on multiple occasions, he claimed that he was not involved in his family business dealings. However, the work of this committee, the reports that we've had from the Treasury Department, suspicious activity reports, the IRS testimony, all tell a different story, all from different sources. And even his own staff didn't get the memo that they weren't supposed to communicate with his son's business. This email, dated December 4th, 2015, shows that Vice President Biden, through his communications staff director, Kate Bettenfield, coordinated a response to reporters when they questioned about the conflict of his involvement with Ukraine and his son's involvement with Burisma. She coordinated with not just Hunter, but Hunter Biden's business associate, Eric Schwerin. Okay? Why is the staff of the President of the United States communicating with a business associate for the President's son? Mr. Schwerin, who served as the executive Hunter Biden's Rosemont Seneca Advisors, was intimately involved in the Biden family business dealings. And he visited Joe Biden's residence 36 times while he was vice president. So in this email exchange, he actually says to her, "Will you call me when you get a chance? I'm in the office or on my cell." And 47 minutes later, this email that was seen on the screen was sent, and the email clearly was a coordination of talking points between the president's office and the business. In fact, what's really striking is that this interaction occurred on the same day. Wait, back up. So the other thing that's really interesting to note is not only did they have an interaction, but in the email it says the VP signed off on this. The VP signed off on the shared communication. The timeline of this is that this occurred on this very same day that the board of Burisma had requested Hunter to help alleviate pressure that it was facing from the prosecutor Shokin's investigation. Let's turn to another email. We have a staff member from Vice President Biden's office emailing Joe Biden about a scheduled call with Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko. Not only was this email sent to, which I think found strange, to Robert L. Peters. We all would think that that would be strange, that Biden is using that alias. But the more strange thing about this email is who is CC'd in the email. Hunter Biden. And not just his personal email, his business email account. So you have, again, a staff person coordinating a meeting with the president and using those resources to coordinate that with Biden's business. So if our president is believed to whenever he says he was not involved in his son's business ventures, then why is his son copied on the email? Mr. Chairman, I ask, before I forget, that these emails be added to the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
What the American people need to be asking is the question, why in the world would the vice president coordinate with a business associate of Hunter Biden? Why would he direct his staff to coordinate with the business associate of Hunter Biden? And why does Hunter Biden need his father's approval to sign off on alleged separate business dealings? And why would President Biden lie about his involvement in his family's international business dealings? The analogy that was made before about Hunter using his father's car to get a speeding ticket is an absurd analogy. A more accurate one would be if Joe Biden threatened the job of the prosecutor or the officer who is issuing the speeding ticket to his son. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and our last questioner is Mr. Armstrong from North Dakota.
We spend all day long talking about evidence and proof and different definitions and all of those different things, and we spend the days talking about unconditional love for sons and addiction, all of these different issues. But I think we miss one of the points in that this was going on for years, and this was going on for years with various different companies during the course of Joe Biden's vice presidency, after his vice presidency, and at least during his candidacy for president. I'm going to use one example out of many. In 2015, Hunter Biden and James Barnard started working with CEFC, which is a Chinese company, energy company, with direct ties to the Chinese Communist Party. Now, there's evidence that they delayed payment until after Joe Biden was no longer vice president, so as to assume no appearance of impropriety. In 2017, after Joe Biden left office, Hunter wants to get paid by the Chinese Communist Party. And in July 4th of 2017, there is a meeting in Moscow between Vladimir Putin and President Xi, where the chairman of the CEFC, which is a Chinese energy party, was present. And it's talking about a large-scale oil and gas purchase of a company called Rosneft by the Chinese Communist Party. Now, on July 30th of 2017, there's a text with Hunter Biden and the members of CEFC, and that text reads, "If I get a call or text from anyone involved other than you, Zhang, or the chairman, I will make certain that between the man sitting next to me and every person he knows and my ability to forever hold a grudge, that you will regret not following that direction." The people he's talking in, this guy disappeared. He's either been killed or he has not been seen since 2018. That is true. And on August 30th, August 3rd, there's another text. And I'm tired of this, Kevin. I can make $5 million in salary at any law firm in America. If you think this is about money, it's not. The Bidens are the best I know at doing exactly what the chairman wants from this partnership. Please do not quibble over peanuts. We've talked about influence peddling. We've talked about all of this. This is a shakedown. Like, we can use whatever terms we want. This is a threat. And they believed it because the next day they sent $100,000. Do you think they were scared of Hunter Biden? I don't know. I think we should find out. And it matters because on 9/17 of the same year, there is a deal done between the Chinese Communist Party and Russia for a 17% sale of Rosneft. And we continue to go through all of those things. And now, finally, in December of 2018, over a year later, there's another text. So we're not talking about a speeding ticket, Mr. Gerhardt. We're just not. You're right, Hallie, and I find myself, because I've chosen to alienate all of my friends and family and employees, and you and the kids and my kids, et cetera, very alone in dealing with rebuilding an income that support an enormous alimony and my kids and costs and myself, dealing with the aftermath of the abduction and likely assassination, that's what the New York Times suspects, of my business partner, the richest man in the world. The arrest and conviction of my client, the chief of intelligence of the People's Republic of China by the U.S. government, the retaliation of the Chinese in the ouster and arrest of a U.S. suspected CIA operative inside China, my suspected involvement in brokering a deal with Vladimir Putin directly for the largest sale of oil and gas assets inside Russia to China, a tax bill that left Eric left hanging over my head, and oh, by the way, my dad is running for president. Mr. Turley, given the evidence we have, would the next step in this investigation be to subpoena Hunter Biden or James Biden's bank records?
Yes, in my testimony, I do warn the committee that once you proceed along the impeachment, the Constitution is on your side, but the calendar is not. You have to quickly determine if this information is going to be withheld so that you can seek judicial review. And that's one of the things that I encourage you to do so that you certainly you should not tarry in an impeachment inquiry.
Ms. O'Connor, you agree with that?
Completely. I wish I could have said it as well.
Mr. Dublinsky, you're a forensic accountant. Would you like to see those bank records?
Absolutely.
Here's the thing, and this is the bottom line. If the Vice President Biden knew or helped or engaged in any conduct that in any way, while he knew his son was involved in, that was helping move forward the interests of Russia and China, our two strategic adversaries on the world stage, the American people deserve to know. If the former Vice President was doing the same thing or knew his son was doing it or helped in any meaningful way, the American people deserve to know. And if the presidential candidate for the Democratic Party in 2019 knew about any of those things, the American people deserve to know. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'll now yield to Ranking Member Raskin for a brief closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Online, everybody's making fun of this Seinfeld impeachment. an impeachment hearing about nothing, apparently, 2 days before the government is about to shut down. But I want to say that all 4 of these witnesses have done a great service for us, not just the Republicans, but for the Democrats too. And I want to thank them for their patience and their intellectual honesty and their surprising consensus on the key questions today. This process might not be such a whipping post, Mr. Chairman, if we heard from actual fact witnesses, which is why I'm so dismayed by the party line vote, not to call Rudy Giuliani or Lev Parnas to testify. Now, if the majority is abandoning the Ukraine Burisma theory, which used to be the heart of the investigation, as I understood it, then clearly we don't need them. But if you're not abandoning that, we absolutely need to hear from them. It's not the complete absence of fact witnesses that troubles us so much today. It's the complete absence of facts. When I started out as a young assistant attorney general, I went to court. I remember on my first day of work, and I heard a judge lecture a lawyer by saying, "Counsel, you have forgotten the very first rule of being a lawyer, which is when you go to court, don't forget to bring the evidence with you." And I'm afraid the majority forgot to bring the evidence with them today. And our GOP colleagues are frustrated, and I know why. Their own witnesses don't agree with them. At least a dozen GOP members on that side of the aisle on the committee have already called for impeachment of Donald Trump. And yet these 3 expert witnesses called by the majority have all agreed that there is not a sufficient quantum of evidence that would justify impeachment of President Biden. And you know, it's not Professor Turley's fault. He's a constitutional law professor. I don't know if they looked across the country for other constitutional law professors. I don't think you could find one who would say that there's a sufficient quantum of evidence. Maybe John Eastman, but I think he may be detained these days. The fact is that this hearing has been dominated by the word "if," as many people have said. It's been filled with hypotheticals. And I'm a law professor, so I'm not averse to them. Imagine a world without hypotheticals. But you don't impeach a president based on hypotheticals and based on obsolete conspiracy theories. Finally, Mr. Chair, I just want to say we've talked a lot about Ukraine today, kind of elusively, indirectly. We've talked about the beleaguered Burisma theory. We talked about Rudy Giuliani and Lev Parnas and their travels there. We've talked about the Ukraine shakedown. But while we were debating all of this and mentioning Ukraine, there was a very important debate going on in the House floor, because the Republican majority in the House Rules Committee has advanced an amendment to delete $300 million from the Defense Appropriation Act, which will go to provide military and strategic security assistance to the people of Ukraine who are struggling to defend themselves against Vladimir Putin's bloody invasion and imperialist attack on their national sovereignty and on the rule of law there. That war has involved mass kidnapping of children, and I would love to hear from some of our friends on the other side of the aisle with QAnon talk about the actual kidnapping of children that's taking place in Ukraine today, mass rape of women and girls, and mass civilian atrocities, bombing of civilian residences, schools, hospitals, and so on. And yet the pro-Trump, pro-Putin elements in the MAGA caucus, and I know that doesn't apply to everybody on the other side of the aisle, thank God, and I appreciate everything Ken Buck has been doing. These people are trying to cut funding for our democratic allies in Ukraine. And so the assault that began on Ukraine with Donald Trump's Ukraine shakedown, holding up security and strategic assistance to them until he lied about Joe Biden, that continues to this day in their efforts to cut off military and economic assistance to the people of Ukraine. We will be fighting that. I hope that we will be able to get separate legislation, and then the MAGA caucus won't have to vote for it. But in any event, the question of Ukraine is a very serious one, and everybody who stands up for democracy, freedom, and the rule of law has got to be on the side of the people of Ukraine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back to you.
Gentleman yields back. one thing I didn't hear from my friends across the aisle in their never-ending defense of the Bidens is what exactly the Biden family did to receive the $20 million. Not one thing. Today's hearing title is the basis for an impeachment inquiry of President Joseph R. Biden. My Democrat colleagues have used this hearing to talk about impeachment, not an inquiry, but actual articles of impeachment. We aren't talking about impeachment today, and they know that. Unlike Democrats' investigations, this committee, under my leadership, does not launch investigations based on predetermined conclusions. We have entered an impeachment inquiry because, as our witnesses have testified, the evidence justifies that. This is how an investigation is supposed to work. I know that some are confused about congressional investigations because Democrat investigations in the past have been about saying a conclusion first and cherry-picking evidence to fit that narrative. The bottom line is that the committee has shown the Bidens alone have brought in over $15 million in their foreign influence peddling, over $24 million if you account for their associates' earnings from the schemes. We have established in the first phase of this investigation where this money has come from: Ukraine, Romania, Russia, Kazakhstan, China. It didn't come from selling anything legitimate. It largely went unreported to the IRS. It was funneled through shell companies and third parties to hide the Biden's fingerprints. This deserves investigation. This deserves accountability. The American people expect this committee to investigate public corruption. Now, we know much of the money goes to Hunter Biden, Haley Biden, James Biden, Sarah Biden, other Biden family members and their business entities. What we need to understand is where it goes next. That is the question this committee seeks to answer, and the evidence supports that next step. Joe Biden showed up, met with, ate with, talked with, shook hands with, and had meetings with, including in the White House, the foreign individuals sending millions of dollars to his family who sold access to him. This was no illusion of access. They got access. My Democrat colleagues wanted to spend this hearing defending the president against an impeachment that is not announced. I do wonder if they have predetermined the president's level of participation in these schemes. 2 days ago, this committee revealed a wire for over $250,000 was sent to Joe Biden's home address. As of yesterday, we know Joe Biden was named on a search warrant that was quashed by a Department of Justice employee. For my colleagues to say there's no evidence of Joe Biden's involvement is not only wrong, but it fails to acknowledge that investigators have been shut down when attempting to explore avenues that led to the president. That's what the Ways and Means Committee released yesterday. The witnesses today have all identified the evidence the committee has uncovered as deserving further inquiry. And that is what this committee will do, no matter where that evidence leads. I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony today. It confirms the evidence compiled by this committee justifies the investigation of Joe Biden's role in his family's international business schemes and justifies the next step of this investigation. One of those steps is gaining insight into where the Biden's foreign money ended up, for what purposes. Therefore, today, I will subpoena the bank records of Hunter Biden, James Biden, and their affiliated companies. And with that, I yield the remainder of my time to Chairman Jordan.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. In his deposition, Hunter Biden's business partner was asked this fundamental question. The request was help. This is the request from Burisma. The request was help from the United States government to deal with the pressure they were under from their prosecutor. Mr. Archer's response, correct. Later question, a few minutes later, what did Hunter Biden do after he was given this request? Mr. Archer's response, he called his dad, someone pretty important in the United States government, which then begs the obvious question. What did his dad do? He gets a request from Burisma. He called his dad. What does his dad do? 5 days later, he gets on a plane, he flies to Ukraine, and he starts the process of firing that prosecutor. That is why Mr. Turley said earlier that this is a confirmed corrupt influence peddling effort. He thinks that's what Joe Biden engaged in. And oh, by the way, that all happened even though the Obama administration had just written the prosecutor general a few months earlier and said, we're impressed with the ambitious reform and anti-corruption agenda of your government. Both the very guy Joe Biden decides to do it. And you know what he did? He decided on the plane. He decided on the plane. Read the Washington Post. September 15th, on the plane, Joe Biden called an audible, quoted, He called it, it was time for a bigger punch. The loan guarantee was the main point of leverage, Professor Gerhardt. He used the money of the people I represent in the 4th District of Ohio to help his family. And anyone with a brain can see that. That was the point of leverage, the vice president declared. So instead, he would tell Poroshenko the loan would not be forthcoming until Shokin was gone. And guess what? They didn't stop there. They made sure the next prosecutor dropped the charges against the very guy who requested this all to happen in the first place, Zolochevsky, the head of Burisma. That is the case. That is the case. That's why the chairman wants the bank records. That's why we're doing the impeachment inquiry. It can't get plainer and simpler than that. And it all happened. It all happened in that 5 days. He gets the request. He calls his dad calls the audible, uses our money to leverage the change. That's what took place. And again, I think anyone with common sense can see it. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. As a housekeeping measure from last week's markup on HRs 4428, 4984, 5040, 5527, 5528, and the en bloc postal package pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I ask the committee members have the right to file with the clerk of committee supplemental, additional minority, and dissenting views without objection. Additionally, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes to the bills subject to the approval of the minority without objection, so ordered. In closing, again, I want to thank our panelists once again for their important and insightful testimony today. With that and without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit materials and to submit additional written questions for the witnesses, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for their response. If there is no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Revealing how Joe Biden abused his public office for his family's financial gain. For years, President Biden has lied to the American people about his knowledge of and participation in his family's corrupt business schemes. At least 10 times, Joe Biden lied to the American people that he never spoke to his family about their business dealings. He lied by telling the American people that there was an absolute wall between his official government duties and his personal life. Let's be clear, there was no wall. The door was wide open to those who purchased what a business associate described as the Biden brand. Evidence reveals that then Vice President Joe Biden spoke, dined, and developed relationships with his family's foreign business targets. These business targets include foreign oligarchs who sent millions of dollars to his family. It also includes a Chinese national who wired $250,000 to his son. Joe Biden also lied to the American people about his family making money in China. He continued to lie about it even when the House Oversight Committee uncovered bank wires, revealing how the Bidens received millions from Chinese companies with significant ties to Chinese intelligence and the Chinese Communist Party. Just this week, we uncovered 2 additional wires sent to Hunter Biden that originated in Beijing from Chinese nationals. This happened when Joe Biden was running for President of the United States, and Joe Biden's home is listed as the beneficiary address. To date, the House Oversight Committee has uncovered how the Bidens and their associates created over 20 shell companies, most of which were created when Joe Biden was vice president, and raked in over $20 million between 2014 and 2019. We've also identified 9 Biden family members who have participated in or benefited from these shady business schemes. Now, what were the Bidens selling to make all this money? Joe Biden himself. Joe Biden is the brand, and Joe Biden showed up at least 24 times with business targets and associates sending signals of access, influence, and power to those prepared to pay for it. The American people demand accountability for this culture of corruption. They demand to know how these schemes have compromised President Biden and threatened our national security. They demand safeguards to be put in place to prevent public officials from selling access to their public office for private gain. Under the leadership of Speaker Kevin McCarthy, House Republicans have now opened an impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden. By opening an impeachment inquiry, our investigation is now focused on whether President Biden engaged in impeachable offenses under the U.S. Constitution. It empowers Congress, elected by the people, to continue providing the answers, transparency, and accountability that the American people demand and deserve. In recent history, Democrats inflicted much damage on the credibility of congressional investigations by peddling the Russian collusion hoax. But this committee, under this majority will not pursue such witch hunts based on manufactured allegations, innuendo, and no real evidence. Today, the House Oversight Committee will examine over 24 pieces of evidence revealing Joe Biden's corruption and abuse of public office. This includes emails, text messages, bank records, and testimony of Biden business associates. We will hear from legal and financial experts about this evidence and crimes that may have been committed as Joe Biden was sold around the world. The House Oversight Committee, along with the committees on the Judiciary and Ways and Means, will continue to follow the money and the evidence to provide accountability so that Americans know their public offices are not for sale. I now yield to Jason Smith, the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Comer. Yesterday, the Ways and Means Committee released new documents showing President Biden was not just aware of his son's business dealings, but he was connected to them. In a newly released message to a Chinese business executive, Hunter Biden mentions preserving the, quote, keys to my family's only asset. That asset, Joe Biden. New evidence released in response to questions raised by members of the committee on both sides when Gary Shapley and Joseph Ziegler, the two IRS whistleblowers, testified in July, paints a disturbing picture of a revolving door between Joe Biden's office and Hunter Biden's business partners. According to a worksheet provided by IRS whistleblower Ziegler, then Vice President Biden's April 2014 official visit to Ukraine occurred only days after a series of White House meetings with Hunter Biden and his business associates regarding Ukraine. Shortly after Joe Biden returned stateside, the Ukrainian company Burisma announced Hunter Biden's appointment to its board. New evidence provided shows Hunter Biden using his father's position to gain favor with billionaire Miguel Alemán, including having Joe Biden host them at the White House in February of 2014 at the vice president's residence alongside Mexican billionaire Carlos Slim in November of 2015, and then in 2016 using Air Force Two to shuttle Hunter Biden and his business associate to Mexico City. Whether it was lunches, phone calls, White House meetings, or official foreign trips, Hunter Biden cashed in by arranging access to Joe Biden, the family brand. The Biden family and their associates received millions in payments from foreign sources, including from Russia, China, Ukraine, Romania. In one email, Hunter Biden even bragged that he cut a deal for $10 million from just one company for, quote, introductions alone. And yet the DOJ wanted to keep the spotlight as far from Joe Biden as possible. One of the items we released yesterday was an IRS interview with James Biden, the president's brother, in September of 2022. The agency was barred in the interview from asking him about Joe Biden and about whether Joe Biden was involved in Hunter Biden's deal with a Chinese energy company. And when Hunter Biden had his tax liability of over $2 million mysteriously paid for by a Democrat Party donor named Kevin Morris, who he barely knew, something IRS investigators saw as a possible campaign finance violation, Assistant U.S. Attorney Leslie Wolf said she did not want any of the agents to look into the allegation. On the board are notes Agent Shapley took from that meeting. He notes that Wolf told investigators that she was not, quote, personally interested in pursuing it. This is the same attorney, Wolf, who in an email we released yesterday responded to IRS investigators seeking approval for a search warrant with, quote, there should be nothing about political figure one in here, that being a reference by definition of Joe Biden. The Biden family sold access to Joe Biden's power, and the Biden Justice Department protected the Biden brand. We must continue to follow the facts. I yield to Representative Jordan.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. This is a tale as old as time. Politician takes action that makes money for his family, and then he tries to conceal it. Never forget 4 fundamental facts. Hunter Biden gets put on the board of Burisma. gets paid a lot of money. Hunter Biden's not qualified, fact number 2, to sit on the board. Not my words, his words. He said he got on the board because of the brand, because of the name. Fact number 3, the executives at Burisma asked Hunter Biden to weigh in and help them with the pressure they are under from the prosecutor in Ukraine. Fact number 4, Joe Biden goes to Ukraine on December 9th, 2015, gives the speech attacking the prosecutor that starts the process of getting that guy fired. Those facts, by the way, are consistent with what the confidential human source told the FBI, and the FBI recorded in the 1023 form, the same form that the Justice Department didn't want to let this committee see. And all those facts, all of that was further confirmed yesterday with the information that the Ways and Means Committee released from the whistleblowers Shapley and Ziegler. Here's a communication from Hunter Biden to an executive with Burisma. Devin and I do feel comfortable with Blue Star strategies and the ability of Sally and Karen to deliver. Hunter Biden put Burisma in touch with Blue Star Strategies. What were they going to deliver? Well, that was in a communication released yesterday as well. U.S. officials in Ukraine and in the United States need to express support for Burisma and Nikolai Zlochevsky to the highest level decision makers, the president of Ukraine, the president's chief of staff, and the prosecutor general. That's what they were going to deliver. And were they successful? The interior minister confirmed that Zlochevsky is no longer wanted. We won in less than a year communications between the folks at Blue Star and Eric Sherwin, who was Hunter Biden's business partner. Awesome work. Congratulations to you guys. Those are the communications. That's what they got done. And remember, when this happens in October 2016, when the pressure is taken off, the case is dropped against Zlochevsky, this is the second prosecutor. Joe Biden fired the first one. The second prosecutor comes in, drops the charges. That's exactly what they wanted done. And the final step is the Biden Justice Department tries to sweep it all under the rug. They slow walk the investigation. They let the statute of limitations lapse for the most important years, 14 and 15, the Burisma years when all that income's coming in. They try to put together this sweetheart deal and get it past the judge. And we learned yesterday in the search warrant examining Hunter Biden's electronic communications, they weren't allowed to ask about political figure 1. Political figure number 1 is the big guy, is Joe Biden. And they would have gotten away with it all. They would have gotten away with it all except for 2 brave whistleblowers who sat in those seats 2 months ago and told their story. And their story has stood up. 2 brave whistleblowers and a judge in Delaware who said, we're not going to let this happen. That's why we're here today. That's why this inquiry is so darn important. It's the oldest story in the world, and those are the facts. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Ranking Member Raskin of Maryland for his opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Before I give my opening statement, I have a parliamentary inquiry. Given that the committee has not been authorized by the full House to conduct an impeachment inquiry, am I correct in assuming that we're obligated to follow the rules of the House, including Section 370 of the Rules and Manual, which prescribe engaging in personalities towards the President?
At ease. Well, considering this is an investigation of Joe Biden, I assume that his name's going to come up.
Right, but the House has not authorized this as an impeachment inquiry, so we're just operating with the general rules. And I think saying that the President lied is considered engaging in a personality. In fact, Section 370 says accusations that the President has committed a crime or even that the President has done something illegal are unparliamentary. And we're operating with the general rules of the House because the House has not authorized.
The Speaker of the House has authorized the impeachment inquiry. It has been authorized.
Okay. All right.
Point of parliamentary inquiry.
The ranking member who wants to be recognized, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez.
I believe changing of the rules must require a vote from the full House of Representatives. rules of the committee.
The chair overrules a point of order. While articles of impeachment are not directly before this committee, we are looking into the potential wrongdoing of the president. Given the unique nature and subject matter of today's hearing topic, these words will not be ruled out of order. So,
okay.
Ranking Member Ashton, please proceed.
Thank you for clarifying, Mr. Chairman. We obviously have an honest disagreement about that. All right, so let's get it straight. We're 62 hours away from shutting down the government of the United States of America, and Republicans are launching an impeachment drive based on a long debunked and discredited lie. No foreign enemy has ever been able to shut down the government of the United States, but now MAGA Republicans are about to do just that. But they don't want to cut off public services to the people and deny paychecks to more than 1 million service members without first launching an impeachment drive, even when they don't have a shred of evidence against President Biden for an impeachable offense. And you think I'm being harsh? Here's what some Republicans have had to say over the last week about the actions of the Republicans as they watch up close, quote, the dysfunction caucus at work, in the words of our GOP colleague from Nebraska, Don Bacon. Clown show, foolishness, terribly misguided, stupidity, failure to lead, lunatics, disgraceful, new low, pathetic, enabling Chairman Xi, people that have serious issues. Those folks don't have a plan, show just how broken they are, and individuals that just want to burn the whole place down. Now, if I said any of these things, they'd probably take my words down, but these are Republicans talking about Republicans. So let's be clear. This isn't partisan warfare America's seeing today. It is chaotic infighting between Republicans and Republicans. It's MAGA versus extreme MAGA, as if anybody in the real world could tell the difference between the two. What a staggering failure of leadership. Speaker McCarthy's invertebrate appeasement of the most fanatical elements of his conference now threatens the well-being of every American. Now, some people think the members of the GOP caucus aren't interested in anything logical. They just want to see the world burn, as Alfred Pennyworth put it in The Dark Knight. But I see a method in the madness. A week ago, Donald Trump posted a comment saying that a government shutdown, quote, is the last chance to defund these political prosecutions against me and other patriots. You get it? To delay justice, Donald Trump would cut off paychecks to a couple million service members and federal workers and furlough more than 1 million workers and pay them later for having not worked. They would halt food assistance to millions of moms and kids and keep NIH in my district from enrolling any more patients in life and death clinical research trials. Trump's convinced that if we shut the government down, his 4 criminal prosecutions on 91 different felony and misdemeanor charges will be defunded and delayed long enough to keep him from having to go before a jury of his peers before the 2024 election. And like flying monkeys on a mission for the Wicked Witch of the West, Trump's followers in the House now carry his messages out to the world: shut down the government, shut down the prosecutions. But the cult master has another command for his followers, which brings us here today. On August 27th, he posted this edict: either impeach the bum or fade into oblivion. They did it to us. Of course, the standard for impeachment is not whether they did it to us, but whether the president committed treason or bribery or other high crimes and misdemeanors. But the Constitution's irrelevant to them. What counts is what Donald Trump wants. As Republican Representative Ken Buck, a Freedom Caucus member, told CNN the other day, President Trump has gone on his social media account and said we should be impeaching President Biden. Kevin McCarthy said we have an impeachment inquiry. You draw the conclusion, directly or indirectly, this impeachment inquiry was a result of President Trump's pressure. So we move from a Trump-ordered government shutdown to a Trump-ordered impeachment process, and yet back in the reality-based world, the majority sits completely empty-handed with no evidence of any presidential wrongdoing, no smoking gun, no smoke. In fact, we have had to slide awkwardly into a House impeachment process without the benefit of the floor vote that Speaker McCarthy insisted was absolutely imperative and necessary when Donald Trump was impeached. In fact, they went to the Department of Justice and they got an OLC opinion saying, quote, "No committee may undertake the momentous move from legislative oversight to impeachment without the delegation by the full House of such authority." OLC opinion, January 19th, 2020. And that's why the House voted in the case of Donald Trump, but that's exactly what has not happened here because they don't have the votes, because dozens of Republicans recognize what a futile and absurd process this is. Now, the title of the hearing is "The Basis for an Impeachment Inquiry of President Joseph Biden." And yet, they present us no basis at all today, even after 8 months of investigation. They've invited 3 witnesses to testify. Not one of them is an eyewitness to a presidential crime of any kind. Not one of them is a direct fact witness about any of the events related to Ukraine and Burisma. Not one of them has participated in the 8 months of investigation in which our distinguished chairman has publicly boasted that he received 100% of everything he asked for. And I quote, "Every subpoena that I've signed as chairman of the House Oversight Committee over the last 5 months, we've gotten 100% of what we've requested, whether it's with the FBI, with the banks, or with Treasury." That means we are the real witnesses here. In fact, the committee has received 12,000 pages of bank records. Here they are, right in front of us, printed double-sided. And not a single page shows a dime going to President Joe Biden. We've received 2,000 pages of SARS reports the chairman subpoenaed. We've held hearings and conducted interviews with everybody from Hunter Biden's business partners to a federal agent assigned to that investigation, and still we found no evidence of wrongdoing by President Biden. If the Republicans had a smoking gun or even a dripping water pistol, they would be presenting it today, but they've got nothing on Joe Biden. All they can do is return to the thoroughly demolished lie that Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump launched 5 years ago, the Burisma conspiracy theory, a fairy tale so preposterous that one of its main authors, Lev Parnas, has now disowned and repudiated it. This is the theory that Vice President Biden, global anti-corruption groups, and most Western governments targeted Ukraine Prosecutor General Shokin for removal because he was threatening the Burisma Corporation, whose board Hunter Biden served on. Trump synthesized the lie in his August 27th post about President Biden, saying, "Look, the guy got bribed. He paid people off, and he wouldn't give $1 billion to Ukraine unless they, quote, got rid of the prosecutor." Trump's story is the opposite of the truth. When Biden was VP, he worked as a key player in the Obama administration and global community's efforts to combat corruption in Ukraine. In late 2015, as part of a coordinated global effort, Biden called for the removal of Viktor Shokin, a corrupt Ukrainian prosecutor general who did nothing about corruption in Ukraine other than to participate in it, rather than assist British authorities who were actually investigating Burisma and its owner. Shokin consistently frustrated their efforts. The leadership provided by Biden was part of a broad bipartisan campaign to oppose corruption in Ukraine. In early 2016, Republican senators Ron Johnson, Rob Portman, and Mark Kirk wrote to the Ukrainian president assailing corruption in his country and urging him, quote, to press ahead with urgent reforms to the prosecutor general's office. Yet years later, in 2018, as President Trump saw Biden as a strong rival in the 2020 election, he worked with Giuliani to twist all the facts around and to suddenly accuse Biden of corruption in calling for the dismissal of a corrupt prosecutor. A few months ago, Chairman Comer and the committee received an insider's account of the plan to concoct and spread this lie from an extraordinary letter sent to us by Lev Parnas, who was Rudy Giuliani's right-hand man. Giuliani and Parnas searched high and low to find anyone who would endorse their contortions about Biden. Their failing crusade culminated in the infamous phone call that then President Trump made to Ukrainian President Zelensky, in which Trump threatened to withhold hundreds of billions of dollars in economic, strategic, and military security assistance to Ukraine unless Zelensky embraced their ridiculous fabrication and falsely advertised to the world that Ukraine was investigating Joe Biden. This shakedown became the basis for the first House impeachment of President Trump. Giuliani's big lie has been thoroughly debunked by multiple sources. As Congressman Buck, a former chief of the criminal division of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Colorado and a member of the House Freedom Caucus said, and I quote, "There is in fact no evidence that Shokin was engaged in an investigation of Burisma or that Joe Biden's role in his firing was in any way connected to Burisma." He continued, "What's missing, despite years of investigation, is the smoking gun that connects Joe Biden to his never-do-well son's corruption. It's scandalous to use impeachment to establish a counterfeit moral equivalence between President Biden, an honorable public servant who has never been indicted or convicted of anything in his career of more than 50 years in public life, and Donald Trump, a twice-impeached president who's recently been found in court to have sexually abused and defamed a woman and fraudulently inflated the value of his real estate properties while facing 91 criminal charges in 4 separate indictments on everything from conspiring to overthrow an election and defraud the American people to making criminal hush money payoffs to stealing classified government documents and hiding them while obstructing justice. Impeachment is the people's final weapon of constitutional self-defense against a president who behaves like a king and violates the public trust by committing treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors equivalent to them. It is reserved for extraordinary public offenses like inciting a violent insurrection against the American government and trying to overthrow our presidential election. That offense in 2021, whose related crimes have resulted in hundreds of criminal convictions and hundreds more being prosecuted, led to Donald Trump's second impeachment in the House on a massive bipartisan vote of 232 to 197 and a similarly lopsided bipartisan vote of 57 to 43 in the Senate. I wonder how many of my esteemed Republican colleagues here who all voted against impeaching Donald Trump, if they were in the House at that point, can reconcile their votes against impeaching Trump for the grave crime of inciting a violent insurrection against the government with their calls supporting impeachment of Joe Biden for allegedly committing a high crime and misdemeanor that has not even been defined yet, much less proven. Mr. Chairman, if this dysfunction caucus is going to insist on going forward, we must receive the testimony of Rudy Giuliani and Lev Parnas, the insiders who know the origins of the lie upon which this sham impeachment is based and who work to spread it. We know that Mr. Parnas is ready and willing to testify, and as a former U.S. Attorney and Mayor, Mr. Giuliani will surely agree to enlighten us on everything. Pursuant to Clause 2K6 of Rule 11, I move that the committee subpoena Rudy Giuliani and Lev Parnas to come and testify in these hearings. And I would like to ask for a vote on that or debate, as you would please, Mr. Chairman.
You made a motion to subpoena.
Are they going to table it? I didn't hear a motion to table.
Motion, yeah. Mr. Chairman. Chair recognizes Mr. Jordan.
I move to table the motion.
There's a motion to table Mr. Raskin's motion. Is there a second?
I'd like to ask for a recorded vote on that, Mr. Chairman. This is on the subpoena of the 2 key figures, Rudy Giuliani and Lev Parnas.
Key figures for what?
But in your theory about why President Biden should be impeached, I think
this is going to be an informative hearing for you, Mr. Raskins, because we were going to present evidence.
What evidence? There's no evidence witnesses.
Well, just,
there are no fact
just
witnesses.
sit back and let the American people see the hearing and let the American people decide.
All right.
Now, look, you've gone over your time. We're going to have a We're going to go by the rules here.
Okay.
Okay?
Motion to
And I'm glad you brought the box of bank statements. If we had a box of all the foreign money the Bidens took, it would have reached to the ceiling.
Yeah.
So let's just
A
have
point
this
of parliamentary
hearing.
inquiry.
No, listen. Everybody's going to get 5 minutes. I'm going to present the witnesses. Everyone's going to get a chance. 5 minutes. I'll let the ranking member go way over time in his opening statement, but we are going to abide by the 5 minutes.
There's a motion to table on the floor.
There's a motion on the floor.
There's a motion on the floor.
Roll call.
There's a non-debatable motion on the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
On the motion to table. Right. Will the clerk, we don't even have a clerk. Okay. Will the clerk get prepared for the roll call? Mr. Raskins made a motion, and then Mr. Jordan made a motion to table, and it was seconded. So the vote will now be on the motion to table Mr. Raskins' motion to subpoena Rudy Giuliani.
And Lev Parnas.
And Les Parnas. All right. Will the clerk take the roll?
No, neither Mr. Giuliani nor Mr. Parnas is in jail now.
This is the motion to table Mr. Raskins' motion.
Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
Mr. Jordan votes aye. Mr. Turner? Mr. Gosar? Ms. Fox? Mr. Grothman? Mr. Palmer? Mr. Higgins? Mr. Sessions? Mr. Sessions votes aye. Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes aye. Ms. Mace? Ms. Mace votes aye. Mr. LaTurner? Mr. LaTurner votes aye. Mr. Fallon? Mr. Donalds? Mr. Donalds votes yes. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Armstrong votes yes. Mr. Perry? Mr. Timmons? Mr. Timmons votes aye. Mr. Burchett? Mr. Burchett votes yes. Ms. Green? Ms. Green votes aye. Ms. McLean? Ms. McLean votes aye. Ms. Boebert? Ms. Boebert votes aye. Mr. Fry? Mr. Fry votes aye. Ms. Luna? Mr. Edwards? Mr. Edwards votes aye. Mr. Langworthy? Mr. Langworthy votes aye. Mr. Burleson? Mr. Burleson votes aye. Mr. Raskin?
No.
Mr. Raskin votes no. Ms. Norton?
No.
Ms. Norton votes no. Mr. Lynch?
No.
Mr. Lynch votes no. Mr. Connolly?
Nay.
Mr. Connolly votes nay. Mr. Krishnamurthy?
Nay.
Mr. Krishnamurthy votes nay. Mr. Khanna?
No.
Mr. Khanna votes no. Mr. Mfume?
Fume votes no.
Mr. Mfume votes no. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez?
Nay.
Ms. Ocasio-Cortez votes nay. Ms. Porter? Ms. Bush? Mr. Gomez? Mr. Gomez votes no. Ms. Brown? Ms. Brown votes no. Ms. Stansbury?
No.
Ms. Stansbury votes no. Mr. Garcia?
No.
Mr. Garcia votes no. Mr. Frost?
No.
Mr. Frost votes no. Ms. Lee? Ms. Lee votes no. Mr. Kassar?
No.
Mr. Kassar votes no. Ms. Crockett?
No.
Ms. Crockett votes no. Mr. Goldman?
Nay.
Mr. Goldman votes nay. Mr. Moskowitz? Mr. Moskowitz votes no. Ms. Tlaib? Ms. Tlaib votes no. Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman votes yes. Mr. Gosar is not recorded. Mr. Gosar votes yes.
How has Mr. Fallon been recorded?
Mr. Fallon is not recorded. Mr. Fallon votes yes.
Okay. Hold for one. Let's see.
Regular order, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, a request for regular order.
We're seeking regular order, Mr. Chairman.
We have members en route to vote. How is Mr. Palmer recorded?
Mr. Palmer is not yet recorded. Mr. Palmer votes aye.
Motion to close the vote.
Mr. Chairman?
Second.
Mr. Chairman? How is my vote recorded?
Has Ms. Green been recorded?
Ms. Green is voted aye.
Mr. Chairman?
Chair recognizes Mr. Timmons.
How am I recorded?
Mr. Timmons is voted aye. Ms. Boebert has voted aye.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Chair recognizes Mr. Fallon.
How am I recorded?
Mr. Fallon is voted aye.
Mr. Chairman, parliamentary inquiry. Mr. Chairman, there was a motion to close the vote, and it was properly seconded.
There is. Will the clerk call the roll?
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the ayes are 20, the nays are 19.
The motion passes to table the Raskins motion. Now, I'm pleased to welcome an expert panel of witnesses who each bring experience and expertise to today's hearing. I'd first like to welcome Professor Jonathan Turley, who is the Shapiro Chair for Public Interest Law at George Washington University Law School. Professor Turley is a nationally recognized legal scholar who has published work in areas ranging from constitutional law to legal theory. Next, we have Ms. Eileen O'Connor, who is a former Assistant Attorney General at the United States Department of Justice Tax Division. As former Assistant Attorney General for DOJ Tax for 6 years, Ms. O'Connor supervised DOJ litigation of civil, criminal, trial, and appellate tax cases. Next, we have Mr. Bruce Dubinsky, who is the founder of Dubinsky Consulting, a forensic accountant. Mr. Dubinsky has accumulated over 40 years of financial, investigative, and dispute consulting experience, served as an expert witness over 100 times, and has testified in over 80 trials, including trials involving criminal and civil financial fraud. Lastly, we have Professor Michael Gearhart, who serves as the Burton Craig Distinguished Professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Professor Gearhart has been a law professor for more than 30 years. He's the author of 7 books and has written more than 100 law review articles and dozens of op-eds in the nation's leading news publication. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witnesses will please stand and raise the right hand. Do you all solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witnesses all answered in the affirmative. Thank you all. You may be seated. We appreciate you all being here today and look forward to your testimony. Let me remind the witnesses we have read your written statements and they will appear in full in the hearing record. Please limit your oral statements to 5 minutes. As a reminder, please press the button on the microphone in front of you so that it is on and the members can hear you. When you begin to speak, the light in front of you will turn green. After 4 minutes, the light will turn yellow. When the red light comes on, your 5 minutes is expired, and we would ask that you please wrap up your testimony. I now recognize Professor Turley to begin his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Comer, Ranking Member Raskin, members of the committee. It's an honor to appear before you today to talk about what is undoubtedly the most weighty constitutional decision that you have under Article 1, other than the declaration of war, and that is the potential impeachment of a President of the United States. It was roughly 25 years ago that I appeared in the impeachment proceedings with other experts in the impeachment of President William Clinton. It was 4 years ago that I appeared in the impeachment proceedings for President Donald Trump. And then it was just 3 years ago that another impeachment occurred without any hearings at all. The shortening intervals between impeachments should be a cause of concern and circumspection for all the members on both sides. And I want to emphasize what it is that we're here today for. This is a question of an impeachment inquiry. It is not a vote on articles of impeachment. In fact, I do not believe that the current evidence would support articles of impeachment. That is something that an inquiry has to establish. But I also do believe that the House has passed the threshold for an impeachment inquiry into the conduct of President Biden. Having said that, I want to just address three inescapable facts that led me to that conclusion. First, President Biden has indeed spoken falsely about these foreign deals. The Washington Post and other newspapers have noted that some of his past comments are demonstrably untrue. Second, President Biden was the focus of a multi-million-dollar influence peddling scheme. And then finally, President Biden may have benefited from millions of dollars as a part of that scheme. Now, those facts should not be taken out of context. They're merely allegations, and they should not become presumptions of impeachable conduct. Indeed, as I've said in past impeachments, self-dealing is a difficult issue under the impeachment clause. The framers sought to avoid ambiguous standards. That's one of the reasons that perfidy was rejected. While it may not sit well with many, President Biden and other presidents can be dishonest, can even lie to the American people, and that would not constitute an impeachable offense. Indeed, most presidents have lied to the American people. That's why I've not liked any president since James Madison. Now, dishonesty alone is not impeachable, and so what I lay out in my testimony are what I call guardrails or best practices. Those are designed to protect this process. Frankly, a number of the things I lay out benefit President Biden, as I say in my testimony. Because presidential impeachment shouldn't be a closed question, it shouldn't be a rush to judgment, and you should avoid the type of confirmation bias that can occur in this process. This is, as people say, a political process, but it is also a constitutional process. Influence peddling is a form of corruption. The United States has signed treaties to combat this form of corruption around the world. And that is also an inescapable fact. We need to find answers as to some of these questions. I'm running out of time, so I'd like to make one last observation, if I may. These are constitutional moments that demand the best from each of us to transcend the politics and passions of our time. It calls for something that's difficult. It calls for solemnity and clarity from members. We have become a nation addicted to rage, and we can fuel that. This body is a powerful teacher, as Brandeis said, and you can teach that, or you can teach a respect for this process. It begins here and now. We can disagree with each other without hating each other. These are important issues, and I think they're close issues. And I think some of these issues really do gravitate in favor of the president. So I would simply say that this is a moment where members and citizens can stand together without prejudging the evidence. And I thank you for the honor of appearing before you today.
Thank you, Professor Turley. Ms. O'Connor.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, members of the committee, the chairman invited me to share my thoughts on the conduct of the tax investigation into Hunter Biden. I make my comments on my own behalf as a private citizen and not on behalf of any person with whom or group with which I might be or have been affiliated. When I learned that experienced IRS special agents had felt compelled to report to Congress about the obstruction of their criminal tax investigation, I felt compelled to share my understanding of how things are supposed to work with people who have no reason to appreciate how disturbing the whistleblower's allegations are. Without context and a frame of reference, it's difficult to know sometimes how seriously to take things. In an October 2022 meeting of the Hunter Biden prosecution team, U.S. Attorney Weiss admitted it was not his decision whether to bring charges the investigation had proven should be brought. This directly contradicted Attorney General Garland's sworn testimony 6 months earlier. This was the final straw. After more than 3 years of having his investigation stymied, but nonetheless having proven substantial criminal charges, Supervisory Special Agent Shapley realized he had to come forward. In fact, he had come forward before, internally within the IRS, using the procedures developed for that purpose. He had complained up his chain of command as early as June 2020 about the obstruction he was encountering, but there had been no response. Once Shapley had taken steps to come forward to Congress, Special Agent Joseph Ziegler did the same. It was not the whistleblower's testimony, however, but what followed that compelled me to write. My first Wall Street Journal article was called "Throw Hunter Biden's Plea Deal in the Trash." Given the substance of the whistleblower's testimony, the plea deal Weiss had worked out with Biden was a miscarriage of justice. After that commentary was published, I heard from many people who were similarly appalled at the unfolding injustice. Many were knowledgeable and experienced tax professionals. Perhaps the most commonly commented on aspect of the handling of the Hunter Biden matter was that Weiss had permitted the statute of limitations to expire on prosecuting provable offenses. This was appalling. It is not significant that the plea agreement, it is not insignificant that the plea agreement was announced on June 20. Let's review what came just before. On August 19, it became known that IRS employees were going to let Congress know about the obstruction they were encountering. Later, Shapley and Ziegler sat for hours of sworn and subscribed testimony with the House Ways and Means Committee staff. It was expected that the committee would make the testimony public. It did, on June 22. U.S. Attorney Weiss, with his June 20 announcement of a plea deal, beat the publication of the whistleblower's testimony by the skin of his teeth, 2 days. If the whistleblowers had not come forward, would Weiss have brought any charges at all? My second Wall Street Journal commentary was published on July 25. It was called "You'd Go to Prison for What Biden Did." Given what Shapley and Ziegler testified they had proven, and the charges the tax division reportedly had authorized, the plea deal represented serious injustice, not only to law enforcement, but also to people who have been caught up in this system and have suffered the consequences the law provides. I received a great deal of positive feedback on this commentary, too. People understand that for laws to be respected, they must be enforced. The nature of any investigation is the following of leads. That didn't happen here. This team was not permitted to search the guest house of Joe Biden's Delaware mansion and Hunter Biden's storage facility in Virginia, to interview family members and business associates, to examine Hunter Biden's abandoned laptop. By November 2019, the FBI had confirmed the devices were Hunter's and the contents were authentic. But the Hunter Biden investigation must not be viewed in isolation, rather as part of a broad landscape of corruption. Don't forget that a full year after that, in October 2020, FBI officials were telling Twitter that the laptop was Russian disinformation. The whistleblowers tell us that the tax investigation of Hunter Biden was an offshoot of an investigation already underway into an online pornography platform. That is how investigations develop. Agents follow wherever the leads take them, and when they take them in the direction of a new investigation, they open one. Question: if U.S. Attorney Weiss had been in charge of that pornography investigation, would he have blocked the investigation into Hunter Biden's tax crimes? I thank the committee.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connor. Mr. Dubinsky.
Good morning, Chairman Comer, Ranking Member Raskin, distinguished members of this committee, guests, and my fellow citizens. Thank you for this opportunity to testify today. First, at the outset, let me state unequivocally and in no uncertain terms that I agreed to testify today not because I have a political agenda or axe to grind, because I do not. Rather, I agreed to testify in this proceeding in order to help this committee and the American people gain a better understanding of how frauds are committed, how complex business arrangements, sometimes using limited liability companies, sometimes those being shell companies, are used in frauds, and how money is moved by fraudsters to facilitate the conduct of illicit activity. Let me be clear, I am not prejudging the facts that have emerged to date with regard to the Biden family and associates businesses and the money they received that had its origins from foreign sources. I am not here today to even suggest that there was corruption, fraud, or any wrongdoing. In my opinion, more information needs to be gathered and assessed before I would make such an assessment. I'm here today to lend my expertise to answer questions that this committee may have while they advance this investigation and gather more facts about the business dealings surrounding the Biden family and associates businesses. Throughout my 40-year career as a certified public accountant a forensic accountant, and a certified fraud examiner, I've worked tirelessly to uncover the truth when it comes to cases involving allegations of fraud, corruption, and wrongdoing. I have investigated some of the world's largest frauds, including have investigated and testified in the criminal case for the United States Department of Justice on the Bernie Madoff Ponzi, the world's largest Ponzi. I've worked on cases like the Enron case, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters election corruption cases, as well as some of the United States' largest cases of tax fraud, to name a few. As the age-old proverb goes, where there's smoke, there's fire. As a fraud investigator, when I see smoke, I immediately look for the fire. The critical question facing the American people today is whether behind the smokescreen clouding the Biden family and associates' businesses, was there or is there a fire? And if there was or is a fire, how big is that fire? Why were members of the Biden family and close business associates receiving millions of dollars of payments from foreign entities and individuals? What services, if any, were being provided? What was the substance of the alleged services being provided? Was the money being paid for a fair amount commensurate with those services? Were political favors being traded and disguised as services? These are the questions that, as a forensic accountant, I routinely am asked to answer when I'm hired to investigate allegations of corruption and fraud. There's a great deal of evidence that has been collected to date by this committee and others trying to answer these very questions. However, much more information is still needed in order to be able to answer these questions and make a final determination as to whether or not the Biden family and its associates' businesses were involved in any improper or illicit activities, and importantly, whether those activities, if any, were connected to President Joe Biden or then Vice President Biden. In my experience, fraudsters purposely create a labyrinth of limited liability companies to create an opaque network of entities that are then used to hide improper conduct. In many instances, these complex business arrangements are typically centered around illicit activities and involve moving money around the globe in a manner designed to avoid the detection of the underlying illegal activity, as well as the movement of the money tied to that illegal activity. Gone are the days, for the most part, when suitcases full of currency or gold bars are exchanged as payment in the conduct of illegal activities. Today, more sophisticated methods are employed to obfuscate the true nature of such illegal activities and to hide the movement of money. The importance of following the trail of money is a critical component of any fraud investigation. The term shell company has its origins in the world of business and finance. The term shell, as you would note, implies that the company is like an empty shell, lacking substance or real activity. Shell companies typically have no employees, no offices, no real operating businesses. They use P.O. boxes for mailing addresses. While I will note shell companies can be used for legitimate business activities, more often than not, they're associated with fraudulent activities like tax evasion, money laundering, hiding of assets, and other illicit practices. It takes a heavy lift to pull the covers back on these shell companies to determine who the true beneficial owners are, where the money went, and to expose the true sham nature of their existence. However, through the use of legal subpoenas and proper investigative methods and a great deal of persistence, fraud investigations can and do expose the identity of the wizards behind these curtains and the extent of their illicit activities. In closing, let me underscore the importance of conducting a thorough, independent, and unbiased investigation of the matter before us today before you reach any conclusions. The American people deserve to know the truth. The rigor and discipline of a well-planned and executed investigation should not be subverted by political motivations or aspirations. To do so would critically undermine the integrity of any such investigation and any conclusions reached. Thank you again for this opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. Professor Gerhardt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the ranking member as well and distinguished members of this committee. I appreciate the honor and the privilege to be able to appear before you today to talk about the basis for an impeachment inquiry of President Biden. I think a good place to begin is with the Federalist Papers. And in the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton warned of the dangers of trivializing impeachment through petty partisanship. He foresaw that impeachment may, and now I quote, agitate the passions of the whole community and to divide it into parties more or less friendly or inimical to the accused. In many cases, it will connect itself with pre-existing factions and will enlist all their animosities, partialities, influence, and interest on one side or on the other. And in such cases, there will always be the greatest danger that the decision will be regulated more by the relative strength of the parties than by demonstrations of innocence or guilt. I think Alexander Hamilton knew what he was talking about, and I think what he said may well describe the current set of proceedings. One thing I might add to all of that is that the framers designed an impeachment process to follow or comply with several safeguards. And it's important that we keep these safeguards in mind as these proceedings go on. The first is the necessity for credible evidence of the commission of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. There is not, at least not that I've yet heard, such credible evidence. Let me give you an example of what I fear is similar to the current proceedings. Hunter Biden is arrested for speeding in a car owned by his father, and the police go after the father. I don't think that's how the law should work. I don't think that's how impeachment should work. I respect members of this committee enormously. Believe me, I'm just a law professor and citizen, and I come here with great awe when I speak to an important body like this. But I listened to Congressman Jordan, whom I respect a great deal, when he said there are 4 facts. Hunter Biden was on the board of Burisma. Hunter Biden was not qualified. So far, by the way, nothing about President Biden. Third, there were executives who asked Hunter Biden for help. Again, not yet any proof about any kind of complicity of President Biden. And lastly, Joe Biden gave a speech. If that's what exists as a basis for this inquiry, it is not sufficient. I say that with all respect, and I think that that is part of the problem, I think, and many Americans think, may exist with respect to these proceedings. A second safeguard is the Fifth Amendment Due Process Clause. It requires fundamental fairness. And I think in these proceedings, something has happened to President Biden that was said to have happened to President Trump in 2019. And that is, the burden has flipped to President Biden to prove his innocence. Any further investigation is being done to ensure that Mr. Biden has to prove his innocence rather than the committee being able to connect the dots in a convincing and persuasive way. It's not me you have to persuade. It's the American people whose trust you deserve and whose trust you have to maintain. A third principle is judicial review. And here I would just remind the committee about the Supreme Court's decision in Trump versus Mazars. The court said about this committee that, in fact, it has to conduct an investigation for a legitimate purpose. A fishing expedition is not a legitimate purpose. Moreover, the court in Trump versus Mazars said that it is not a legitimate purpose for the House or House committee to be conducting the function of law enforcement. And I heard many references here to criminal misbehavior, to whether or not somebody should be thrown in jail, criticisms of a prosecutor, Mr. Weiss. That sounds to me like an attempt to really substitute for the proper legitimate proceedings of the House. 2 other safeguards real quickly. One is that these proceedings should be based on principle, not partisanship. And I fear that what we're hearing today, which can be traced all the way back to 2019, and accusations made against Mr. Biden as far back as then, are really driven by partisan animus more than they are by principle. And a final safeguard is for the House, the full House, to authorize an impeachment inquiry. That does not come from me. That comes from Speaker McCarthy. He said there should be the full House's approval. It also comes from Mr. Trump's Justice Department, who said there must be a committee must be authorized by the full House. That has not happened here. My concern is with the Constitution. That's what my devotion is to. And I hope all of us understand that there's nothing more serious than honoring our Constitution and following the design the framers gave us. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. I do want to state the fact in 2019, the D.C. District Court judge ruled a vote of the full House was not required to commence an impeachment inquiry. Now we're going to begin the question and answer phase. We have 47 members here today. that are going to ask questions, so we're going to abide by the 5 minutes. I will begin, followed by Ranking Member Raskins. This week, the Oversight Committee issued another bank subpoena targeting specific wires originating from Beijing. Most of our bank subpoenas have been for Biden family associates' accounts, resulting in thousands of pages of bank records. We've identified these bank accounts based on suspicious activity reports filed with the Treasury Department after being flagged by the banks. The bank records obtained this week showed that on August 2nd, 2019, Jonathan Lee and Ms. Tang Ling in Beijing sent Hunter Biden $250,000, listing Joe Biden's home address in Wilmington, Delaware. The wire stated it was for a personal investment. A second wire showed that on July 26, 2019, Ms. Wang Xin sent $10,000, listing Joe Biden's home address in Wilmington, Delaware. The $10,000 wire said it was a loan to beneficiary. Now let's talk about the $250,000 personal investment. Sure looks like Jonathan Lee was making a substantial investment in the Bidens months after Joe Biden announced his run for the presidency in April 2019. Now, who is Jonathan Lee? During Devin Archer's interview with the Oversight Committee, he explained how Vice President Biden developed a relationship with Jonathan Lee. Vice President Biden had coffee with Jonathan Lee in Beijing. He talked with him on the phone and even wrote a college recommendation letter for Mr. Lee's children. Hunter Biden even met with Jonathan Lee after flying on Air Force Two to Beijing with Joe Biden. The Beijing Bidens cultivated a relationship with Jonathan Lee and other Chinese nationals for one reason and one reason only: to access their wealth. As we all know, the Bidens had nothing to sell except the brand, which was Joe Biden. Hunter Biden sold the brand well, making the Biden family millions from China and elsewhere. While Joe Biden was vice president, Hunter Biden became an investor in a Chinese investment fund with Jonathan Lee and owned a percentage of BHR Partners through one of his many LLCs. This was a political problem for his dad, the big guy, who was running for president. In October 2019, 2 months after the Beijing wires, Hunter Biden's lawyer claimed he served only as a member of the board of directors in an unpaid position. This was Hunter Biden's lawyer. He was in an unpaid position. Abby Lowell now claims the money is a documented loan from a private individual. Now, these wire statements are very concerning, and the Biden's defenders' justification for the money isn't consistent with what we know from the suspicious activity reports from Treasury. Mr. Dubinsky, I'm very skeptical of Abby Lowell's statement that the $250,000 payment from Jonathan Lee and another woman was a loan, because the wire states it was a personal investment. We've also reviewed documents at Treasury that don't support Mr. Lowell's theory. In your experience, are international loans of this amount supported by documentation such as loan terms, interest rates, and repayment schedule?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. They typically would be. You would see that. You would see documents setting forth the interest rates, terms of repayments,
Absolutely.
all of those.
Absolutely. So would it be important to review Hunter Biden's bank records and see if Hunter Biden paid back the money to Jonathan Lee, or if he sent the money to someone else, I don't know, using a cashier's check, for example?
Well, as somebody mentioned earlier, it's very important to follow the money.
Absolutely.
And that's very important in this situation.
Thank you. Professor Turley, we all know what this payment's really for. It's for influence peddling and selling the Biden brand. Now, to date, we have shown that the Biden family and their companies received more than $15 million without providing any known legitimate services between 2014 and 2019. If you include the business associates in their companies, they've received over $24 million. Based on evidence we've developed so far, what are some of the potential laws we should be analyzing during our impeachment inquiry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually lay out what are the most obvious potential articles of impeachment without saying that those have been established, but the ones that I recommend for the committee to focus on. And one of the things I recommend is that the committee actually start by looking at potential crimes, because I've said that in the past two impeachments, that it's an important thing to front-load criminal acts for the reasons I laid out. It gives a very high standard for impeachment, quite frankly, higher than it's binding. I said in the last two impeachments, you can impeach for non-criminal conduct. So I suggest starting there. But as I talk about in my testimony, bribery, obstruction, conspiracy, abuse of power, Those have all been raised in past impeachments. Abuse of power is the article that is very, very common. It tends to be a catch-all, and it is the one that I've always been a little bit uncomfortable with, which is why I suggest you end there rather than start there, because that's the article that brings in a lot of non-criminal conduct. And frankly, I think that you need to focus as much as you can on the evidence and whether you can establish these connections.
Very good. Thank you. Chair now recognizes Mr. Raskins of Maryland for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor Gerhardt, has there ever been an impeachment process launched in the middle of a government shutdown?
No.
Well, why did the Office of Legal Counsel opine that there must be a vote of the full House before a committee launches into an impeachment investigation? Why did Speaker McCarthy insist on it and, in fact, say that there would be one in this case?
I think the Office of Legal Counsel said that, at least in part, because an impeachment inquiry is deadly serious. It is, again, just about the most serious thing any House committee ever undertakes. And one safeguard against a committee acting on the basis of just, let's say, the party membership is to ensure that the full House is behind the impeachment inquiry.
A dozen of our colleagues on the Republican side have already called for impeachment. I'm struck by the fact that of the 4 expert witnesses brought together today, not a single one of them argued that a sufficient quantum of evidence exists today to justify the impeachment of President Biden. Is there any precedent in our country for launching an impeachment inquiry absent evidence of wrongdoing by the president?
No. And in fact, I would just point out that with Richard Nixon and Bill Clinton and President Trump in 2019, the full House authorized those impeachment inquiries.
Lev Parnas sent us a letter in which he said, it was addressed to Chairman Comer, in which he said, the narrative you are seeking for this investigation has been proven false many times over by a wide array of respected sources. There is simply no merit to investigating this matter any further. And he says, please abandon this effort to investigate the Bidens, which is nothing more than a wild goose chase. And he was Rudy Giuliani's right-hand man, gallivanting all over the world to try to put together a case back in 2019 that Joe Biden had done something wrong. Do you agree that, given that the evidence we've looked at over the 8 months comes down to this discredited Burisma conspiracy theory, we should hear from those responsible for concocting the story in the first case, in the first place, specifically Lev Parnas and Rudy Giuliani?
Absolutely.
What did you think about the fact that the very first act of the committee in its impeachment investigation was to reject the idea of subpoenaing Lev Parnas and Rudy Giuliani, who are at the heart of the story that's the basis for impeachment?
I think if there's going to be an investigation into the president, all the evidence, that is to say, all the participants, anyone that has knowledge, should be spoken to.
We have lots of colleagues on this committee and off the committee who've called for the impeachment of Joe Biden, who also voted against impeaching Donald Trump for inciting a violent insurrection against the Union. And hundreds of people have gone to jail in subsidiary acts under the umbrella of that insurrectionary process. Now, can you come up with a theory that it would allow someone to say, I am going to vote to impeach Joe Biden for offenses unstated and evidence unknown, but I will oppose and vote against the impeachment of Donald Trump for inciting a violent insurrection against the Union, which is something that concurrent bipartisan majorities voted for in the House and the Senate?
I cannot, and I might just add as a law professor that one of the things I suggest to my students in trying to assess the constitutionality of any governmental action is to take the names out, switch the names or switch the political parties and see if the outcome is the same.
So if Joe Biden had incited a violent insurrection against the Union and said, you go and fight like hell, and if you don't, you won't have a country anymore, would you consider that in the ensuing mayhem and chaos to be an impeachable event or not. To your mind, in applying the law to the facts, have you seen any evidence that Joe Biden has done anything remotely comparable to what Donald Trump did, which earned him his impeachment in the bipartisan vote of the House?
I have not. And I also just might add, with all due respect, I heard the phrase Biden family many, many times. But I don't know who the Biden family is. I don't know who's being referenced when people talk about the Biden family.
Thank you, Professor Gerhardt. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move for unanimous consent to introduce Lev Parnas's July 18th, 2023 letter to you and to me and to the rest of the committee into the official record of this proceeding.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Jason Smith from Missouri, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's amazing to be sitting in your committee. It's a pleasure to be here. Yesterday, we had a committee to release over 700 pages of documents that came from the 2 IRS whistleblowers based on the last oversight hearing when they presented before this committee, where members, both Republican and Democrat, asked for additional information, and they provided it, and we brought it forward. What was interesting is the other side of the aisle actually mentioned Trump a whole lot more than they ever mentioned Biden. And it's happening over here, too. So I think it's kind of consistent both in the Ways and Means Committee and in the Oversight Committee. But Ms. Connor, my question is yesterday, the Ways and Means Committee voted to release additional information provided, like I said, by Gary Shapley and Mr. Ziegler. One of the documents shows that Assistant U.S. Attorney Leslie Wolf ordered investigators not to pursue leads into possible campaign finance violations. We know that over $2 million of Hunter Biden's tax liabilities were paid off by a big Democrat Party donor and Hollywood lawyer who's named Kevin Morris. James Biden, the president's brother, told investigators he did not know how Hunter Biden even knew this individual, but was later asked to thank him for the payment, quote, on behalf of the family. The Biden family. The family. So how would such payments that essentially pushed under the rug the president's son's tax problems, at least for 1 year, be considered a campaign finance violation on part of the Biden campaign?
Thank you for the question. I have no idea. I thought you were going to ask me why would Leslie Wolf say don't look into that. And I think the answer to that probably is that if it's a campaign contribution, then it implicates political person number one. And that apparently is a big barrier that had been created throughout this entire investigation. And as far as it being a campaign contribution, that $2 million actually was intended to satisfy the liabilities for 2 years of Hunter Biden's late filed and unpaid taxes.
Is it unusual for an assistant prosecutor to say, don't look at this individual, this person's off limits?
As I mentioned in my opening statement, that is how investigations develop. The agents follow the leads wherever they take them. And in this case, a legitimate investigation was being done of money that was being paid, and for the assistant U.S. attorney who is orchestrating the investigation to say, don't look at that anymore, I think the reason is related to another instruction of hers that she didn't want to get public integrity involved. And that tells us that she was looking beyond Hunter Biden and into a person whose activities would be subject to public integrity at DOJ.
One thing that I want to ask, since you worked tax division for DOJ, if Kevin Morris gave a gift of $2 million to help pay off Hunter Biden's debts, who has to report that on their taxes? Does Mr. Morris have to report it, or does Hunter Biden?
Well, as I understand it, the parties are claiming that it's a loan and that Hunter Biden will pay it back between 2025 and 2027.
Would that have to be reported on any tax records?
If it's a loan, no. But I I haven't seen any of the documentation of that loan. And that is one, I'm sure Mr. Dubinsky can tell you that calling something a loan is one way to claim that it's not taxable income.
So one quick question. You know, we uncovered yesterday that the Biden family and associates received over $20 million from 23 different countries that they had business ties to or communications with. And they also had over 20 shell LLCs where they would transfer money in and out. If you were still sitting in your office in DOJ's tax division, would this web of entities and activities concern you?
I would make sure that my prosecutors were concerned about it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes Ms. Norton from the District of Columbia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor Gerhardt, pleased to have you with us today. In your testimony, you referenced Alexander Hamilton's warning about the dangers of trivializing impeachment through petty partisanship. Let me ask you, Mr. Gerhardt, do you think that initiating an impeachment inquiry against President Biden without any evidence of wrongdoing by the president meets any basic standard of proof?
Not credible proof at all, in my opinion. And in fact, I think one thing to keep in mind about a hearing like this or any kind of anything that calls itself an impeachment inquiry is the critical importance of building public trust. And that gets built in part on the basis of credible evidence.
Well, Professor Gerhardt, what is the risk to our Constitution and even for the rule of law if impeachments are initiated without any evidence of wrongdoing by a president?
They trivialize impeachment, they trivialize the Constitution, and they ride roughshod over the rule of law. Nothing good comes from abusing a power, whether it's done by a president or by Congress.
Professor Gerhardt, do you believe that initiating an impeachment inquiry without any evidence of wrongdoing by a president is consistent with the rule, with the view that impeachment is a grave and solemn duty?
Impeachment is a grave and solemn duty, all the more reason why all evidence, for example, relating to Burisma ought to be heard and considered. That would actually add credibility to what the committee is doing.
I would be remiss if I did not add that it is incredible that we are holding this sham hearing 2 days before the government will shut down. Instead of this hearing, we could be discussing how to fund the government, or we could discuss my bill to exempt from federal government shutdowns the federal and independent agencies that are exclusively or primarily federally funded but have jurisdiction over local D.C. civil and criminal justice matters. Or we could be discussing how we are going to provide back pay to federal contract workers if Republicans unfortunately do push us into a shutdown. Instead, we are holding this sham hearing. I yield the remainder of my time to Mr. Raskin.
Well, thank you kindly, Ms. Norton, for that. Mr. Comer referred to a 2019 wire to Hunter Biden while President Biden was not in office. He was a private citizen, so of course was Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden has never held public office. Mr. Smith referenced a DOJ email from 2020 during the Trump administration. So, Professor Gerhardt, I mean, what do you make of the idea of impeaching a president while he's in office for something that his son did or may have received when the president wasn't in office?
It's not consistent with the American legal system. Just imagine if the names are switched. Just imagine if this was Jared Kushner, or one of President Trump's sons.
Mr. Smith talked about $20 million that he thought Hunter Biden had received and put in the names of different family members. I think the Washington Post has debunked that as recently as this weekend, saying it was like 8 or 9 million. But let's say it were 20 million. That's 1% of the $2 billion that was brought back by Jared Kushner from Saudi Arabia to a company that Jared Kushner created the day after the Trump administration ended. But assuming there were no other evidence, would it be fair to attribute that $2 billion that Jared Kushner pocketed with the $25 million management fee every year that Jared Kushner pocketed, would it be fair to attribute all of that to Donald Trump because it's his son-in-law?
No, not without any evidence actually showing the president knew it.
Yeah. So,
or approved it.
Because the principle of American law is that people are responsible for their own conduct and not the conduct of their adult children. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you, and to the gentlelady for yielding, and I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Mr. Jordan from Ohio.
Thank you. Professor Gerhardt, it wasn't just a speech. He leveraged $1 billion of American tax money, and he did so at a time when our government was supportive of the prosecutor. Here's what our government said. The Assistant Secretary of State, we have been impressed with the ambitious reform and anti-corruption agenda of your government, written to the Prosecutor General, who Joe Biden leverages our money to get fired. The United States fully supports your efforts to fight corruption, she further wrote. The Interagency Policy Committee said this on October 1st, 2015. The IPC recommends moving forward with a third loan guarantee to Ukraine in the near term. And even after Joe Biden gives the speech on December 9th, the European Commission said, their report said the anti-corruption benchmark is deemed to have been achieved for Ukraine. But the most telling evidence is what his business partner said. Devin Archer, when we deposed him under oath just 2 months ago, said this. Here's the question. The request was help from the United States government to deal with the pressure they were under from their prosecutor. You know what Mr. Archer's response was? That's correct. Next question. What did Hunter Biden do after he was given that request? He called his dad. That's what we're investigating. That's one of the three things Professor Turley talked about, the influence peddling scheme. I want to go to those three things, Professor Turley. False statements, influence peddling scheme, and Joe Biden might have benefited. Let's do the third one first. Is a benefit to your family, can a benefit to your family be a benefit to you?
It is. There's been repeated statements that you need to show that President Biden accepted direct money in order for this to constitute a benefit, even under criminal cases that deal with bribery, extortion, the Hobbs Act. The courts actually have rejected that. They've said that money going to family members is in fact a benefit, and I don't really see any legal basis for that. Obviously, the strongest case is if you have a direct payment. But this idea that you can have millions going to a politician's family and that's not a benefit, I think is pretty fallacious.
Yeah, how about the false claims thing? In your written testimony, you said, to the extent that the president has used the White House, I think this is a little broader. To the extent the president used the White House staff to maintain false claims or resist disclosures, it can fit into the type of Nixonian abuse of power model. We know all kinds of false statements have been made by the White House. Joe Biden's made them. He said it was a lousy question when they asked him, have you ever been involved, talked to any one of your son's business partners? We know that was false. Ron Klain said, the president's confident his son didn't break the law. Press Secretary Jen Psaki said, never spoke to his son about his overseas business dealings. What do you think about all those false statements from the White House in this abuse of power issue?
Well, the involvement of White House staff and executive branch staff has been really one of the tripwires that we saw in Nixon, to some extent even in Clinton. The degree to which you enlist support for a false narrative or to obstruct Congress can go into things like abuse of power. One of the things that I suggested is that if you look at past impeachment inquiries, and once again, this is an inquiry to find evidence, you're not voting on articles of impeachment, those allegations tend to develop last, and you look at what you have found.
Yeah. How about the Attorney General? I'm concerned about statements he made. March 1st, 2023, in front of the Senate, he was asked a question about Mr. Weiss's investigation. He said this in response to Senator Grassley. Mr. Weiss has full authority to bring cases in other jurisdictions if he feels it's necessary. Last week, the Attorney General told us that Weiss had the authority because I promised him he would have the authority if he asked it. That seems to me to be something different. It's He said to the Senate, he's got full authority, no problem. Last week he told the House Judiciary Committee he had authority because I promised if he'd come talk to me, I would give him the authority. That I already told the Senate he had. Do you see a concern there with false statements coming from the Biden Justice Department?
Well, there is a concern. You don't have to prejudge the evidence to say that obviously this is part of the inquiry. And what I don't understand is the opposition to the inquiry itself. It seems to me the test is, would the alleged conduct, if proven, establish impeachable offenses? And is there a credible basis for those allegations? I think the answer is clearly yes, that there is a basis to look at the president's conduct without prejudging whether that qualifies at the beginning of that inquiry as an article of impeachment.
And let's be clear, you don't need a full vote of the House to proceed in an impeachment inquiry phase of our constitutional duty to do oversight. In fact, the Democrats did it. 4 years ago, I was in an impeachment deposition run by Adam Schiff in the bunker in the basement of the Capitol, and I went to the floor. So I'm in an impeachment deposition, and I went to the floor to vote on opening an impeachment inquiry. They did the same darn thing because you have that authority as a Congress when the Speaker of the House makes that designation.
The Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, did in fact initiate the impeachment. In some cases, then you have a later vote. I've said in my testimony, I consider that the best practice to have a vote of the House. But the court that was referenced earlier looked at this and said that the Constitution does not require resolution. Actually said if you look at all the impeachments, often there wasn't a resolution. That doesn't mean it's not a good practice, but the Constitution itself does not require such a resolution.
Thank you. Gentlemen, time to expire. Chair now recognize Mr. Lynch from Massachusetts for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I do want to agree with the chairman that the witnesses we have here today do bring an awful lot of experience and expertise to the issue. But what they don't bring is facts, right? They don't bring evidence. None of you are able to really elucidate or illustrate actions by the president with respect to this inquiry. Ms. O'Connor, I do want to ask one clarification. You mentioned in your oral testimony that you had written a commentary entitled, "You'd go to prison for what Biden did." You'd go to prison for what Hunter Biden did. Isn't that?
That's exactly right. I was cutting down words to stay within my 5 minutes.
You realize, yeah. That's an important word, though, that you left out, though,
It
right?
is. I regretted it immediately.
So the article, just for the record, and I'd like to enter into the record unanimous consent.
Without objection to order.
The article, Ms. O'Connor, is you'd go to prison for what Hunter Biden did. I think that's an important word. Yeah. Okay.
It is.
Thank
yes.
you.
I did not delete it intentionally, only in
Reclaiming my
service
time.
of time.
Reclaiming my time. So when I walked into this hearing room, my first question was, where's Rudy? Where's Rudy? Where's Rudy Giuliani? You know, this is supposed to be an inquiry on the facts against the president for potentially an impeachment, articles of impeachment. And the one person who was an agent of President Trump was sent to Ukraine to dig up some dirt, find some dirt on Joe Biden. Just like he said to the election officials in Georgia, find me 11,780 votes. Find me some dirt on Joe Biden. And we don't have him here. We're not allowed to ask him questions. And Professor Gerhardt, would it not be helpful to have a factual witness here who was, and let me just read from, this is an excerpt of the call between Mr. Trump and President Zelensky. He says, Rudy very much knows what's happening, and he is a very capable guy. If you could speak to him, that would be great. The other thing, there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the Attorney General and Rudy would be great. And then, so he's actually placing Rudy Giuliani in Ukraine with the imprimatur of authority for the president. Wouldn't that be a useful witness
It seems obvious that he should be brought before the committee.
Yeah, you would think so. What we have here is a lot of allegations. I've heard about, emails from Hunter Biden from China. Hunter Biden cashed in, the IRS interview with James Biden, and I hear a lot about the Biden family. But look, this was an impeachment inquiry about President Biden, and I would try to discern what the allegations are for the president, because they're non-existent at this point. Is there a reason? The other question is, why hasn't Rudy Giuliani, if he's such a key witness and was on the ground on this and had direct authority from the president, why isn't he here? And I think, and Professor Gerhardt, maybe you could elucidate on this, Rudy Giuliani also lost 60 cases. He brought 60 cases across the United States with respect to the big lie, and he was a midwife for the big lie. He brought 60 cases and lost them all for lack of evidence. So that, I believe, hurts his credibility, does it not?
It does. His credibility has been hurt in a number of different ways, yeah.
Right. He also made allegations against Dominion voting machines. And now he's being sued by them because he falsely declared that those machines were unfairly helping President Biden. Isn't that right?
That's right.
Wouldn't that also lead to a drop in credibility on behalf of Mr. Giuliani's testimony?
I mean, I agree with you, and I would just add that because Mr. Giuliani is a lawyer, he has to abide by and comply with the rules of professional conduct, and he's in trouble because he hasn't.
All right.
Gentleman's
My time has expired. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Mr. Turner from Ohio.
Professor Turley, thank you so much for the materials that you provided to this committee. Your legal analysis is first off, incredible in its historic foundations, but also its legal descriptions of the aspects of how do you conduct an impeachment investigation, what are the standards for an impeachment investigation, and taking, as you relate in that memo, some of the public facts that you're aware of and comparing them to congressional authority and oversight responsibilities. I think it really does help the overall discussion, and I think it gives validity to the need for this committee to move forward on an investigation as you look to historically what's happened before. Now, you made some comments in your opening statement about your description that I think are important to focus on in trying to guide our investigation. You said that it's not criminal for a president or vice president to lie. That's right. You also said that it's not criminal that Hunter Biden received, someone paying the child of a vice president for doing nothing isn't necessarily criminal. Those are my words, not yours. But you did take that next leap that using your office, taking official actions to benefit individuals or third parties to induce them to financially benefit your family would be a crime. Would it not, Professor?
It is. That's if you take a look at some of the treaties and sources that I cited, the United States has for years combated influence peddling as a prototypical form of public corruption, and much influence peddling follows that pattern. Many people now accept that what Hunter Biden did was rather raw and open influence peddling. So the only question is, was the president involved in that? And I'm not prejudging that. But there's an argument that now that you hear, that they were just selling the illusion of access. The fact is, you have to ask yourself one question. How do you know? Even if you accept that selling the illusion of access is not misconduct, how do you know it was an illusion?
Well, and that's where I'm going to go next, because there's also another concerning aspect of President Joe Biden's actions as vice president, for which there is currently an active criminal investigation, and that is his misuse of classified documents. There has been appointed by the Department of Justice, by the Attorney General, a special prosecutor for the purposes of investigating the federal crimes that could have arisen as a result from this president's misuse of classified documents. The fact that he had them at the Penn Biden Center for Diplomacy and Global Engagement and the Wilmington, Delaware private residence of President Joe Biden, as well as other matters that might arise from it, places where there were other people. One of those other people happens to be Hunter Biden. Now, this committee, in its scope of this investigation, indicates that these classified materials are also relevant because, for example, the Oversight Committee has requested information regarding the classified materials discovered in the President's home where his son has resided during the time period relevant to the investigation and personal office. The White House has not provided this information. Obviously, his son was receiving payments from Romania, Russia, Ukraine, China. If there are in those documents that relate to, for example, the prosecutor in Ukraine, or Burisma itself, or other aspects of Ukraine, or any of the parties or individuals, obviously, that were making payments to Hunter Biden, that would be relevant, wouldn't it?
It would be relevant. One of the things I address in my testimony is I say that the most concerning line for me in this inquiry is pre-office conduct. And what I say is that there should be a type of rebuttable presumption against bringing in pre-office conduct. But there is precedent for it when it forms.
Well, and this, he was in office at the time because he wouldn't have had access to classified documents. These are not things that he did as a private citizen. He had these documents given to him. And I want to ask you, in his scope as both senator and as vice president, there's been a lot of talk that perhaps the president inadvertently ended up with these documents. Now, first off, there's an unbelievable number of documents. He's clearly a classified document hoarder, and he clearly was mishandling them. Can't you infer intent by knowledge of the law? Here, the President Biden knows how to handle classified documents and what mishandling is. Wouldn't that be attributed to his intent?
Well, that can all go to a question of establishing intent. And in all these cases, you obviously don't have a confession. I'm not too sure if the documents matter will become relevant to an impeachment inquiry. I've said earlier that the issue that concerned me about the documents is that they ended up being distributed to different sources, it appears, that they went to different locations. And there are accounts of being in the president's home. And the question is, were they divided and why? But it's not clear to me whether that would amount to an impeachable offense or not.
Right, you have to make that nexus, which is the next step. I've seen some of these documents as the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. I can tell you they are of the highest level of concern and threat to national security. I think we do have to get to the bottom of why was he taking these and what was he doing with them. I'll yield back.
Now recognize Mr.
Chairman, I have a
Connolly from
unanimous
Virginia for
consent
5 minutes.
motion. Mr. Chairman, unanimous consent motion. I ask unanimous consent to introduce page 131 of the transcript of Devin Archer's testimony, where the question is asked, but he did not provide the Burisma executives with actual access to his father. The access to his father was an illusion of access.
Gentleman's out of order. You'll have
Right.
time in your
Right.
5 minutes.
An
Chair, now
illusion of
recognize
access
Mr.
to his
Connolly from
father
Virginia
other
for
than
5
social.
minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is it admitted?
I object.
The clock's ticking, Mr. Connolly.
What's the objection based
Mr.
on?
Goldman's taking your time, Mr. Connolly. You have it's your turn to speak.
Distract, yeah, you're taking time away from me unfairly. Distract, deflect, dissemble. Hold on to those two words, distract and deflect, because I think this hearing's all about, look over here, not over there. So, Professor Gerhardt, I've heard concern about branding. So, shouldn't we be concerned about all those Biden towers all over the world where foreign partnerships were formed and influence was used here in the United States? I've seen these towers in Indonesia, in the Philippines, in Turkey. I even saw one in Chicago. Shouldn't that be a source of concern of this committee in terms of influence, both foreign and domestic, when President Biden became president?
If there were such things as Biden buildings.
Well, was there anyone who did have them?
I think we all know who had.
Well, could you tell us? Because,
Well,
just give me the name, Professor
I think if
Gerhardt.
we're talking about Mr. Trump.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, when President Biden appointed his son to manage U.S. foreign policy both in the Persian Gulf and the Middle East peace. By the way, his son, who couldn't qualify for getting a security clearance, but President Biden apparently granted it to Hunter anyhow. And then after leaving the White House, getting a $2 billion deal, because we're told by Mr. Dubinsky, follow the money, especially foreign money. Shouldn't that be of concern to us that maybe a sweetheart deal occurred with the blessing of the president with foreign money? And shouldn't we look into Hunter Biden for that, given the fact that he handled Middle East peace in the White House?
It should have been a concern with President Trump and his son-in-law.
Oh, Trump, I got that wrong again. I'm sorry. Well, let's see. I'm looking at, I heard again, I think it was Professor Turley talking about, because he's not prejudging, of course, but he's just suggesting that maybe we want to look into criminal activity like obstruction, fraud, and abuse of power. So let's take fraud. So shouldn't we be concerned that a New York judge just found President Biden's organization committed fraud every year for the last 10 or 15 years, and that under the Martin Law in New York, that Biden organization is now subject to dismemberment and dismantlement because of the fraudulent activity? Shouldn't that be of concern to us?
That should be of concern with respect to Mr. Trump.
Mr. Trump again. And in this case, we're not speculating. A judge actually made that ruling?
Yes, sir.
Should we be concerned about the personal? I mean, while we're at it, since we're loading on, shouldn't we be concerned about the personal behavior of a president? For example, President Trump or President Biden being found guilty of sexual assault and defamation associated with that activity, again in a civil court, in this case in New York?
We should be concerned as it relates to Mr. Trump, yes.
With Mr. Trump again. I just think that one of the reasons we're here is because somebody has been indicted in 4 different locales on 4 different sets of concerns with, I think, 81, 91 actual counts, and has been found guilty in 2 civil proceedings, one involving sexual behavior and one on actual corporate fraudulent activity. And we don't want to talk about any of that. We want to speculate about discredited testimony from discredited witnesses like Rudy Giuliani, whom we're afraid to subpoena. That's what this is all about. This isn't about our need to defend Joe Biden. This is about their need to make sure we get off topic, that we no longer talk about the pending criminal trials of the former President of the United States. And if anything's worthy of examination, that is, not this. I yield back.
Chair, now recognize Mr. Donalds from Florida for 5 minutes.
Point of order. Down here. Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Mr. Donalds for 5 minutes. You'll have 5 minutes. You'll have all 5 minutes. No, you're out of order. You're out of order, Mr. Goldman.
I have a
when your time is, you will be recognized.
Chair
recognizes Mr. Donalds for 5 minutes.
Is it being introduced?
Chair recognizes Mr. Donalds for 5 minutes. Byron, it's your
Chairman,
time.
the rules require you to recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No.
Yes, for a point of order, they absolutely do.
Chair recognizes Mr. Donalds.
The motion.
And is Mr. Donalds' time ticking too?
Order.
No,
Chair
Mr. Donald's
recognizes
time
Mr.
is not going
Donalds.
to take. Actually, Mr. Chairman, I request this clock be set back to 5 minutes so we can.
Clock back to 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, can I just make a parliamentary inquiry then? Are we not to make points of order on either side during
You keep speaking about no evidence. Why don't you all just listen and
I'm trying to introduce evidence.
You've already introduced. You've already had your share of evidence.
Are you
now,
admitting
Mr. Donalds, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dubinsky, I want to come to you quickly. A lot of talk about evidence. On the screens in the room, we have an organizational chart from the IRS investigative team that was looking into the business practices of Hunter Biden and his associates. This org chart is from 2014. Now, Mr. Dubinsky, when my former life, I was in community banking, and I'm comfortable with looking at organizational charts. When I first saw this chart, the first thing I thought about was a real estate holding company or a developer, and this is not to demean developers in the great east state of America, but developers typically have multiple companies that float with various business interests and business lines. But the funny thing is that in the business dealings of Hunter Biden, there is no real estate, none at all. So, Mr. Dubinsky, in your professional experience, looking at this organizational chart of business structure, what do you see here?
I see a very complicated structure of entities that are interrelated and would give me concern. If I were an investigator, I would want to know what's going on in these entities, who's behind them, how's the money moving between them, and what is the substance of the transactions? What's really going on here?
Mr. Dubinsky, do you think it's in the interest of this committee that is now in an inquiry phase to actually find out all of the flow of money between these entities and what the purpose was?
Absolutely.
Next slide, please. For my colleagues on the other side, we're going to start talking evidence now. This is now a slide of the organizational chart of the Hunter Biden business companies and with associates from 2018, from the same IRS investigators who broke down the business structure in 2014. Does this slide cause you the same concern, Mr. Dubinsky?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Now let's talk about some more. Actually, one point I want to make on this. Ladies and gentlemen, and I know it's kind of small, so I will submit all this for the record. I would love my colleagues on the other side to see this. In 2014, one of the key owners was Devin Archer, who did testify and was under deposition under oath by the Oversight Committee. In 2018, Devin Archer is no longer listed, but his wife, Krista Archer, is now listed. Mr. Dubinsky, when you see a situation where ownership interest moves from one spouse to the other, is that a concern of some level of fraud potentially?
I would call it a red flag. That's something I would look at and again, try to get to the bottom of what happened there. Was it just transferred? Was there money behind it? What was going on? Okay, thank you. Next slide.
Now, this is to a text message. This is a text message between, it's going to Naomi Biden. That's what this one is. Hold on, wait, so let me get my stuff back. There we go. Sorry. This is the WhatsApp text message between Jim Biden and Hunter Biden. In this text message, it clearly says, anyway, we can talk later, but you've been drawn into something purely for the purpose of protecting Dad. This is between Hunter Biden and Jim Biden. Last time I checked, the father of Jim Biden and Joe Biden is now passed away. So I'm assuming this is Hunter Biden saying to Jim Biden, the president's brother, that you've been brought in this for the sole purpose of protecting Dad. Ms. O'Connor, do you think that this text message would lead this committee to get further information about the business dealings of Hunter Biden and how that actually links to Jim Biden, the president's brother, and why they are so concerned with protecting Dad, a.k.a. Joe Biden, a.k.a. the President of the United States?
Yes.
Thank you. Next slide, please. This is a text message between Hunter Biden and Naomi Biden. And this one is a famous one. Everybody knows this one. This is a famous one that says, I hope you all do what I did and pay for everything for this entire family for 30 years. It's really hard. But don't worry, unlike Pop, I won't make you give me half your salary. Mr. Dubinsky, if you saw a text message like this in a potential money laundering operation or a potential pay-for-play operation, would you be looking for information related to money going from son to father?
Absolutely, without a doubt.
Thank you. Next slide. Oh, this is a fun one. Ladies and gentlemen, this one is from 2018. This is about 4 months before Joe Biden launched his campaign for president of the United States, December 2018. The highlight is, this is a text message between Jim Biden and Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden was in a bad way, by the way. He was really strung out. He lost a bunch of money. He needed help. Jim Biden says, this can work. You need a safe harbor. I can work with your father alone. It'll probably take several months and everybody can read the text. Ms. O'Connor, Mr. Dubinsky, if you saw a text message like this between the president's brother and the president's son, wouldn't you be concerned about them trying to give plausible deniability for the president of the United States to not have any knowledge of said business dealings?
It's worth.
Gentleman's time's expired, but please answer the question.
It's worth investigating.
Mr. Dubinsky?
I would agree. I would investigate this.
I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Before I recognize Mr. Christian Morte, Mr. Goldman, I will give you an opportunity to quickly recognize you for your point of order.
I just want to make sure that page 131 of the transcript of the Devon Archer interview is entered into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Mr. Christian Morte from Illinois for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Professor Turley, Hunter Biden's a private citizen, not a federal official, right?
Yes, sir.
A special counsel investigating Hunter Biden recently indicted him for various illegal acts. I'm sure you're aware of this indictment. I have it in my hands. But nowhere in Hunter Biden's indictment is there any allegation of Joe Biden having committed any wrongdoing, right?
That's correct, sir.
Not a parking ticket, not a moving violation, not a library fine, not a high crime or misdemeanor. In fact, on page 19 of your witness statement that you submitted, you said, quote, "The current record does not establish any crime, let alone an impeachable offense." Now let's further explore what's been established about Joe Biden. The Hill reports Senator Marco Rubio, quote, "noted that House Republicans are discussing a special impeachment inquiry to obtain evidence of criminal behavior that they have not been able to dig up through the House Oversight Committee." And Rubio warned that setting up a special impeachment counsel without strong evidence of a crime could trivialize the process. Now, sir, Senator Rubio is a Republican, right?
Yes, sir.
Let's talk about whether this evidence that Mr. Rubio was referring to exists. Our colleague Ken Buck, a senior member of the Judiciary Committee, said the following regarding evidence linking President Biden to an alleged crime. Quote, "That doesn't exist right now." Now, sir, Ken Buck is a Republican, correct?
Yes, sir.
Senator Mitt Romney of Utah said, quote, "There hasn't been any allegation yet, any conduct which reaches the constitutional standard for impeachment." And sir, Mitt Romney is a Republican as well, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, let me turn to another topic here. Ms. O'Connor, here I have a poster of an entry from your professional LinkedIn account. There's your picture, and it says Law Office of Eileen J. O'Connor. We printed here what you posted roughly 1 week ago. It says, quote, "The Biden administration is promoting and enabling the invasion." That's what your post says, right?
Yes, it does.
And it further goes on to say, if this doesn't stop quickly, then the entire USA will be invaded with millions of military-aged men from many different countries who are ready to cause total havoc while getting paid $2,200 a month in welfare to do so.
Did I write that?
You reposted it, and it says it is an engineered death spiral. Now, let me show you another posting that you put up on your professional LinkedIn account.
May I respond? If there is an
You can
impeachment
respond when
inquiry,
I'm done.
it should
When I'm
be
done with my
for
question,
the deliberate demolition of the United States of America.
Ma'am, this is another posting from your professional LinkedIn account. This says, announcing Michigan telethon to raise funds for 16 alternate electors who crooked Dana Nessel wants to jail. Now, ma'am, that's your professional LinkedIn account, right?
It is.
Now, let me turn to you, Mr. Turley. Professor Turley, in 2006, you wrote an op-ed in The Guardian entitled, quote, "Stop Persecuting Polygamists." There, you likened polygamists to, quote, "persecuted minorities," and you said polygamy is, quote, "a practice with deep and good faith religious meaning." Isn't that what you said?
I represented the sister wives family in challenging a polygamy prosecution.
The answer is yes. You've been crusading for legalizing polygamy for years. In fact, in an op-ed in the USA Today, you said that a Utah polygamist named Tom Green, who was also convicted of pedophilia for raping his 13-year-old stepdaughter, should not have been charged with polygamy. Now, Mr. Chairman,
Can I respond, sir? Because that's not, can I respond? Because it's not entirely accurate. I actually criticized him. What I was dealing with was the constitutionality of what is called morals legislation. And I admit I'm pretty libertarian.
Was Tom Green convicted of pedophilia and rape?
The government can
Was he
impose a
convicted
moral
of
code on
pedophilia and rape? The answer is yes. Mr. Chairman, we're counting down the hours until a government shutdown, and here we have a hearing where we have one witness who defended a polygamist who was convicted of pedophilia and rape, and we have another witness with LinkedIn accounts with extreme views posted. I think that, unfortunately, this speaks to the credibility of the witnesses and the credibility of this impeachment inquiry. I yield back.
Point of order. Point of order right over here.
Chair recognizes Mr. Biggs. What's your point?
Mr. Chairman, when a member of the committee impugns the integrity of a witness, is it against the rules to allow those witnesses to respond to that malicious statement?
I'm quoting the article.
I'm not asking you. I'm asking the chairman. I've asked for a ruling on that.
Mr. Chairman, he can use his own time to question any witness he wants.
I was recognized on a point of order.
Point of order.
What's your point?
My point is that
I'd ask for a ruling on my point of order
the way
first.
we've always proceeded,
I'd
Mr.
ask for
Chairman,
a ruling on my point of order
Mr.
first.
Chairman, in
I'd
order
ask
to
for a
rehabilitate,
ruling on my point of
Mr.
order
Chairman,
first.
Okay, here's the ruling. The witnesses have the opportunity to address that during a line of questioning. If Mr. Turley wants to address that during another member's line of questioning, then he's more than welcome to do that. Remind everyone, we're on their 5-minute clock, and now the chair recognizes Ms. Mace from South Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2019, Representative Raskin didn't think a House vote was needed for an actual impeachment inquiry. And to quote Representative Raskin, he said in 2019, there's no formal constitutional or statutory or even the House rule for how an impeachment inquiry is to begin. And so it means different things to different people. I don't want to hear another word from the left or anyone across the other side of the aisle about impeachment inquiry. This is complete and total hypocrisy this morning. Today, we're going to bring the facts. Today, we are going to bring the evidence. In 2017, the Joe Biden family teamed up with Chinese company CEFC to make millions off of granting access to Joe Biden. Hunter even arranged for Joe Biden to share office space with the CCP-aligned company CEFC. My Democrat colleagues say none of this is relevant because Joe Biden wasn't vice president while his family did these shady deals. Turns out that's complete and total bullshit. It's a lie. Hunter Biden referred to access to his father as the keys to his family's only asset. Those words are going to come back and haunt Hunter Biden and his family forever. Yesterday, the Ways and Means Committee released an FBI memo on the interview they had with Tony Bobulinski, a former Biden partner in crime. I'll read a bit of that right now. The work conducted by CEFC, Gilliar, Walker, Hunter Biden, James Biden, and Yee over the preceding 2 years was discussed in detail. In particular, CEFC was closing significant investment deals in Poland, Kazakhstan, Romania, Oman, and the Middle East during this period of time. Period of time is in reference to the years 2015 and 2016, when guess what? Joe Biden was vice president. As an aside, Rob Walker, in previous testimony, also confirmed that Joe Biden attended a meeting with the head of CEFC. So now we know CEFC was working with the Biden family while Joe Biden was vice president. And I'll continue reading from Tony Bobulinski's report, which says, and I quote Bobulinski, Hunter Biden and James Biden did not receive compensation because Joe Biden was still vice president during this time period. There is a concern it would be improper for payments to be made to Hunter Biden and James Biden by CEFC due to its close affiliation with the Chinese government. Hunter Biden and James Biden both wanted to be compensated for the assistance they had provided to CEFC's ventures. In particular, they believe CEFC owed them money for the benefits that accrued to CEFC through its use of the Biden family name to advance their business dealings. The Bidens, coincidentally, were paid over $1 million by CCP-affiliated Chinese company CEFC shortly after Joe Biden left office as vice president. Now we know why, because it was back pay. I'm going to show another image. This is a text message between Hunter Biden and Gong Wendong, an agent of CEFC. Hunter says, my uncle will be here with his brother, in all caps, who would like to say hello to the chairman. He goes on, Jim's brother, if he's coming, wants to say hello. His uncle's brother. I wonder who that could be. I can't quite figure it out. Hunter puts brother in all caps, and it doesn't take a genius to figure this out, but since I'm not always dealing with geniuses, and Washington, D.C. has been illustrated today, I'll spell it out. The brother of Hunter's uncle, Jim, is Joe Biden. Why was Hunter so secretive about his father? I'm going to tell you why. It's because Joe Biden didn't want the American people to know he and his family were getting paid millions and millions of dollars from a company closely tied to the Chinese Communist Party. CEFC knew paying Biden family members was bad, so they covered it up. Hunter knew Joe Biden hanging out with CCP businessmen would be a bad look, so he tried to pull a genius move on us with this whole my uncle's brother bullshit. We already know the president took bribes from Burisma. I also want to add, betraying your country is treason. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this text message between Hunter Biden and Gan Wangdong and the FBI memo regarding their interview with Tony Bobolinsky, showing Joe Biden's connections to CFC during his vice presidency.
Without objection, so ordered.
Professor Turley, we got 30 seconds. In your experience in reviewing cases of fraud, do people who are conducting legitimate business usually go through these efforts and hoops to keep their foreign entanglements hidden?
Yes, the issue with influence peddling is that it can, in some circumstances, be legal, but it's not something that necessarily is made public. The public does not buy into the idea that you can sell your family brand if it's influence peddling. So what happens with influence peddling is that you often have the commission of crimes that conceal it, and to take steps so that it's not public. That may include, but it's not necessarily the reason in this case, but it may include the failure to pay taxes, the failure to register as a foreign agent. And part of the purpose of an inquiry is to see if there is a linkage between those acts and, more importantly, a linkage to the president. Can I briefly respond to the earlier attack? You may have additional questions. I don't want to take your time.
Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, the gentlelady's over time.
Okay.
But we'll work with you on that because I do think you need to respond to that ridiculous statement. Now, Chair recognizes Mr. Khanna for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Turley, you testified or in your written statement about best practices for the House, and you say that it's not legally required for the House to vote to have an impeachment inquiry, but it is a best practice. Could you explain why you think it is a best practice for the House to have that vote?
Certainly. I think that what the courts have said is it's not required, as you noted, so it's not a condition for the initiation of an inquiry. I just think it is a good practice. Whether it occurs after the initiation, I think still a vote of the entire House brings the solemnity and the weight to the decision. And I do think it's one of the best practices that I suggested in my testimony.
And what would it mean if the votes weren't there? I mean, hypothetically, if they had a vote and 10 or 20 people voted for it, I mean, you're a student of constitutional history. What would that say? I mean, why is it important in your view as a best practice to have majority support for something like this?
I think that the public expects members to take this process seriously, and part of that is to go on the record whether you believe there's grounds for an inquiry. So I think that in terms of the best practices, that gives, I think, the weight of the House to the efforts, and so that's the reason I criticized the move of Speaker Pelosi when.
And it would give you pause if there was a vote which said that the House didn't think that there should be an inquiry, right? I mean, you would give that weight as a constitutional scholar, correct? I mean,
if the House as a body said that there should not be an inquiry, then clearly that has, on the merits of the inquiry, that has some weight.
So it would be your recommendation to Speaker McCarthy today to bring up that vote, correct, for a House inquiry?
I've always said that I thought it was a best practice.
And your recommendation to him today, I mean, he's listening, I'm sure his staff would be bring that vote to the House floor?
I always think it's a good idea to bring it to the House.
And it would be your testimony, based on what you've said, that if that vote failed, that should have some real consideration in whether we go forward with this. I mean, let's put members on the vote. Because my view is they don't have the votes. I think it's going to be a very lopsided vote against it, and that's why they're not bringing it to the floor.
Yeah, I can't speak to that.
Let me ask you this. You also said that I do not believe that the current evidence would support articles of impeachment. And I want to be careful because you've said it, you think it supports an inquiry, but not the articles of impeachment themselves. So I want to be precise in what you've said. Can you explain to the committee and the country why you believe that the current evidence does not support the articles of impeachment today?
Well, at the moment, these are allegations, and there is some credible evidence there that is the basis of the allegations.
But I understand that, and I'm not questioning that. I'm questioning what you don't think today, if you were going to vote, if this was the case, you would vote no, correct?
On this evidence, certainly, because the inquiry.
Okay, and my question